Alcohol strength, ABV, alcohol by volume. It's kind of funny, we use it all the time when we're buying whiskey and when we're talking about whiskey, when we're sharing whiskey. It's just almost part of the first couple of things that we might mention as we start to talk about the whiskey that's in front of us. It's critical to the assessment of whiskey, to the enjoyment of whiskey. It's intrinsic to it is whiskey. And yet, we don't seem to have spent a lot of time talking about why that is. I'm speaking about myself, of course. So tonight we're going to talk about the bandings of different ABVs, why they exist, how they came about, and what they mean to us. With a few good bottles and things on the way, and we'll finish out with a bit of fun. And like some of you, I encourage you to do this in the comments as well. Share the highest ABV Scotch whisky that you have on hand, or indeed the highest ABV whiskies, and we'll see what they are towards the end of the session tonight. I'm looking forward to it as always, and I'll see you all in a second. Hello, whiskey folk. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the vPub. Welcome to another Thursday night. As always, I hope you're sitting comfortably and I hope you've got something nice in the glass. If you're picking this up live, fantastic. And if you're picking this up on the replay, you're very welcome. Thank you for doing so. For the people that are sitting here live tonight, let us know what you're sipping throughout tonight. Let us know what's in the glass, of course, but very specifically, be sure to mention the ABV. I guarantee that for the majority of you, as you're sipping that glass, you probably don't even need to look at the label to remind yourself what the ABV is. You probably just instinctively know the ABVs and strengths of a lot of the whiskies that you're going to have on your shelf, a lot of the whiskies that you're going to have in front of you. It is a vital, pretty important part of whiskey pleasure, of whiskey enjoyment, of whiskey assessment, of everything that we've come to enjoy about whiskey. So we're going to spend tonight talking about alcohol by volume. We're going to go through everything from the minimum legal strength that it has to be in order to be called whiskey. It's enshrined in law and EU law, and further afield to 40% ABV. And from there, we'll go up the bands. We'll go through 43, 46, 50. We'll go into cask strength. We'll go into a still strength, receiver strength, filling strength. And we'll talk about all the concepts that have brought all of these strengths about and what it means to us as whiskey enthusiasts as well. And throughout tonight, as I say, please, I encourage you, as you're talking about your whiskies, every whiskey that gets mentioned, follow it with an ABV tonight, just for tonight's vPub, see how we got on. Listen, I've put a bit of a clumsily worded poll out there. It's in the live chat, so if you're participating live, you can throw your answer in there, and I'll leave it throughout tonight as we speak. Remember, you can only vote once. It's not like you can go in and change your mind or whatever. It's a bit of a frustrating thing about the YouTube polls. And I'm asking you simply, let me see how I've worded it. I tend to find I slow down when sipping higher ABV whiskey. And what I mean by that is that the lower the ABV, the easier it is to just drink and not really think about it. It's more for kind of, and I'm not suggesting guzzling or shooting or, quaffing down like you might lighter fermented products like beer and wine. I'm speaking about just softer whiskies, 40% and that type of thing. These are easier to drink, intrinsically easier to drink. And for me, speaking personally, I tend to find the stronger the whiskey is, the closer to cask strength, let's say, the higher the ABV, the more the whiskey makes itself known to you and your palate, makes itself aware, challenges your sensibilities and says, oh, wait, slow down a bit here. It shouts at you. It's asking you to take your time. Now, of course, we can use these whiskies and mix drinks and things like that. We can water them down and make them much easier to consume and drink. Cask strength whiskey is great fun for playing with and diluting with a few drops at first, and then a teaspoon, and then a glug, and all of these things. I'm not speaking about that. I'm speaking about the neat drink, how you're forced with the higher ABV to pause a little while, take smaller sips and slow down. But I might just be speaking about myself. I understand that completely. So I've put that wee poll in there. I'm not going to pay much attention to it throughout tonight, but later on in the night, we'll look back into it and see what the general consensus is from all of you that participate live. If you are joining live tonight, here's something that I always forget to do. Remind you to leave a wee like, to click that like thumbs up. We've got 31. We're approaching 240 of you. Got your slippers on and your feet up and your dram poured. So we could probably do a wee bit more than 31. That helps me because it reassures everyone that drops into the vPub when their first impressions, they look at the thumbs up and they realize that it's legitimate content. And hopefully people can find some value in it. It's not for everyone, this long form vPub content, I understand. But the likes are very, very encouraging for me and I appreciate it greatly. Before we get into it all, I'll raise a wee glass to welcome you and jump into the lounge and welcome some of you beautiful whiskey folk and dedicated barflies. Cheers, everyone. It's a privilege to hang out with you. I look forward to my Thursday nights. I know that some of you guys do too. Whiskey and Wine Trails Tom is here sitting back with a 2022 Boona Cask Strength at 56.6% ABV. I was thinking about bringing that up. I picked a couple other things tonight, Tom, but that's literally at Cask Strength written across the label, and it was a good one for us to participate in and use tonight. Jimmy Jazz is saying, good evening, Aquavita. I just cracked up my 71.6% for a 10-year-old Austrian Broger. I'll let it breathe, fire emoji, for a bit. A real go slow. I don't know if anyone can beat 71.6% tonight. I'll share with you my highest ABV that I have on hand a bit later tonight. Sure Kitty is saying Aquaviti sipping a nice Russell's Reserve YouTuber pick at 55% ABV. That's my favourite ABV. My favourite strength of whiskey is 55. Just a wee bit indulgent. It's based on nothing other than just my favourite number. After this, have a gorgeous Corbin Cash from California at 75% ABV for a light drink. says Sugar Kitty. MG Rodney saying good evening, Roy Flies. If there's anything I guess about a whiskey, it's the ABV. I think I'll celebrate the kids in bed with a Devil's Deanston 66.6% ABV. That'll be the signatory vintage one, right, MG? One of Sevy's favourites, Doc, has a bottle of that on hand, or once upon a time he had a bottle of that on hand, and Sevy and Rolfie enjoyed participating in some Devil's Deanston, as did I. Road to Dram is saying good evening, Roy. Aquavita, he's saying an 11-year-old refill Cask Strength Craigellachie from the Thompson brothers at 50% in the glass. Sounds like a belter, a wee Craigellachie at 50% sipping strength. Good to see Alberto. How you doing? Justin Wan is saying feeling weak tonight, sipping a good and solid RN10 at 46%. I hope by feeling weak you're talking about 46% ABV rather than your strength and your fortitude. I hope you're well, Justin. I hope you're doing okay. Rick Johnson is here. Good to see you, buddy. Just saying Aquaviti, no comment yet. Nice to welcome you in as always, Rick. Peterhead Frank is saying even Cask Strength barman. Thank you, big guy. Cask Strength Peterhead. Good to have you in. George Ellis saying Glen Glasgow 50.5% in the cabinet here in Arizona. Nice geeky topic tonight. Well, I hope the right amount of geekiness, George. I hope we can make it accessible. I mean, I'm not a chemist. I'm going to be just kind of talking about things from a whiskey enthusiast perspective, right? Starting off with a freshly opened Kilcoman 13-year-old, says Ian Williamson, 50% ABV. Neckbore is very good, fantastic, perfect sipping strength, Ian, as well. Remco de Vries. Remco, I think maybe it's the first time I've mentioned you, but you've got a gold barfly. Maybe I've mentioned you before. It's wonderful to have you. Good evening, Aquaviti and all the barflies. A new Bin Romac from the Contrast series in the glass. I shared one of those recently as well, the Virgin Oak. Remco, I hope you're enjoying it. I hope it's going down well. Alistair Grayson, good evening, Aquaviti and the barflies. Hope all is well. Sipping a lovely Cadenheads Kilkerran 13-year-old port. Superb. We all know that Alistair's favourite Kilkerran is the port cask Kilkerran. So he's in fine form tonight. Gene Kelly saying, regretfully ducking out early for the final Sienna home game. We'll catch up on replay and looking forward to the Sunday lock-in, says Gene. My peak ABV is 61.5% Blackadder Milton Duff. Yes, for all of you patrons who are tuning in or will be tuning in a wee bit later or picking this up on the replay, I had to postpone the lock-in from last week, and it's worked out quite well, actually, because there's even more details I can share with you, so it's all fine. But fingers crossed that our internet holds up tonight, because on Sunday last week we had no internet, and that continued into the week. on and off, let's call it on and off. But it's been pretty stable since. So fingers crossed that everything's going to be okay tonight. It's looking okay so far. Pepe Bruno is saying, I'm lucky to catch the live vPub. Pepe, that's very, very nice of you to drop in. And it's very nice of you to buy me a wee dram as well, Pepe. Cheers to you and welcome, my friend. Kiwi Gore, Rick Johnson and Hellswood are all celebrating being members of the Barflies for 34, 30 and 59 months. Kiwi Gore is saying, hot toddy at 5%-ish. At least I can watch live. Oh dear, you're a wee bit poorly. I'm so sorry to hear, buddy. It's wonderful to have you here and thank you for your support as a Barfly. Rick Johnson is saying 30 months, how time flies. Like me next week. Okay, you're flying over. Are you coming over for the Independent Spirits Festival, Rick? That'd be amazing. 67.4%. Signature Vintage Craigellachie from Helen. Now we'll make this one last. Aye, 67.4. Another good pick, Helen. Thank you all supporting me in the Barflies like so many of you do. You keep the vPub absolutely ad-free. You support me and you get in return a wee coloured Barfly loyalty badge, but all access to all the channel themed and whiskey themed emoji. Dave's Rams is saying, good evening, good to have you, Dave. He's saying, Aquavite, I've been tuning in every Thursday for the last couple of months and enjoying your channel. First comment tonight with an Ardnamurchan AD in my glass. Dave's Drams, I hope that's not your last comment. It's often the case for people, they just kind of stick their toe in the water for a wee bit, see what it's all about. Dave, you're very welcome here. It's wonderful to have you contributing in the comments as well. Ardnamurchan's a great pick tonight. I would suspect that that's 46.8%, that one, I think. Stewie Baby saying, good evening, Roy. A Demi-John Springbank, 55.9% in the glass. Looking forward to seeing you in the Barflies and a festival next weekend. Superb. Somebody else coming to the Independent Spirits Festival. Can't wait for it. It's just jumped there, Stewie. But I finished your comment, didn't I? Black Fen, he's saying, Conrad, he's saying, I'm starting the evening gently with a couple of small pours, as am ice. Conrad, he's saying, to Matins, to compare and contrast, the Legacy at 43 and Gordon McPhail's Discovery at 43% as well, 2011 vintage. Fantastic, Conrad. Sean Holtgrave is celebrating being a member for a year now. Sean, thank you very much for your support, buddy. Wonderful to have you here. And I guess the Gold Barfly is what's awarded to you after a year of support. That's wonderful. Ryan Sutherland, my pal, from 8 Doors Distillery, right at the top of the country, saying, evening, Roy, and all the Barflies. Good to have you, buddy, as always. And a grain of malt from James. Good evening, folks. Dan DVDW, just as it jumps. He's saying, starting with an Hardbeg Oogie, but we'll move on to 100 proof signature vintage and proper 64% ABV Glenlivet to end the night. Actually, I should probably put a wee extra in here, 57.1%. Talk about that. Make sure I talk about that 100 proof thing tonight as well. There we go. I don't want to be sipping another dram necessarily, but it's nice to talk about it. Thomas Dam is in saying, sipping some rums tonight, and in the glass, a blend of Jamaica and Guyana rums finished in an ex-Arran cask, 46%. So despite the fact that you're on rum, you've got a wee whiskey theme going on there because you've got the rum from an ex-whiskey cask. Ricky Ricardo saying, sipping a Springbank Cage 10-year 2011, 56.8%. Ricky, stay tuned. There might be some Springbank turning up a wee bit later. Hellswood is saying, can we wish Gav's Drams a huge happy birthday? Absolutely. I think, did I miss his birthday? It's his... It's a special birthday for Gav's Drams. Can we just pause for a second? I'm going to pour something really much, much nicer. I'm going to pour some of this. You can see the colour, you know what I'm pouring here. But I want to pour something special to wish our Gav a very, very happy birthday. Nice one, Helen, for reminding me as well. Like, you're so good at doing. Because this is a special one. Talk about the whiskey a wee bit later, but for now, we'll raise a wee glass to our pal, one of the best channels on YouTube out there, one of the most direct, matter of fact, down to earth, passionate. What a collection he's got. Fantastic guy as well. Met him a few times. Got to hang out with Gav a few times in real life. But this week he's celebrating his 70th birthday. Let's all raise a wee glass to our pal Gav Strams. Cheers, everyone. It's a wee birthday present if you don't know Gav. Hopefully one of the moderators can maybe pick up his channel link and drop it in. And as well as giving him a wee birthday toast, we can give him a wee birthday subscription as well. That's a tasty dram I've just poured there. Christoph has bought me a dram this evening. All interesting topic. Looking forward to it in the replay. Thank you very much, Christoph. It's nice for you to have jumped in and bought me a dram well ahead of things tonight, buddy. Thank you very much for your support and participation as a barfly too. And I hope you enjoy picking this up on the replay. Welcome back, Christoph. All right, I'm not catching up with the comments. I can see there's loads and loads of you. You've just broken 300 of you, and it's fantastic to have you all here. As I say, I really look forward to my Thursday nights. It's a tonic for me. I hope it's of benefit to you too. The glass that I've been sipping on as a setup tonight and things, we're starting at the bottom. We're starting at 40% ABV. It's the minimum strength that it can be in order to be whiskey. And that's a general rule of thumb around the world. I know there are some places that you maybe pick up things that look and are labelled like whiskey at lower ABVs, 35, 37 and a half and things, but I don't own any of that, and I've not really seen much of that. Most of the whiskey drinking planet produce their whiskey to a minimum specification of 40% ABV, which is interesting because there's no rhyme or reason for that number. 40% is, apart from it being quite a nice round number, it's really quite, it's just, isn't it odd how money or politics tend to shape things? Taxation tends to shape things. You know, so much of our culture is built upon some people meeting in a room and making decisions, and it's forever the case, right? And that's very much where we start tonight from. 40% ABV. Why is it 40% ABV? Well, it would be nice for me to sit here and tell you that it's because all the whiskey makers stood up and said 40% ABV is the pinnacle for whiskey consumption. That is what it should be at a minimum. That's where it needs to be. It's not strictly true to say that that's exactly the case. If we go back to the 19th century, the ABV, the alcohol strengths, were kind of all over the place, and they were often just put out there at maybe Cask Strength. Certainly when they were watered down and diluted, they tended to be put out there to try and be good and engaging and a good drinking strength, depending on the source, depending on the integrity of that source, all of that. But generally speaking, the alcohol strengths were all over the place. Then you come into late 19th century, early 20th century, and the temperance movements across the world. I mean, not just in the UK, but generally speaking, temperance movements were springing up everywhere, certainly in the US. And people were pushing back against alcohol, and they wanted to blame alcohol for a lot of the world's problems. So there's lots and lots of reading you can do. There's fantastic YouTube videos on things like prohibition and everything, and it was just really a fascinating time to study as we came to terms with how potent a drug alcohol, ethanol, actually was, and how it was easy to be abused, especially if it was made in excessive amounts, cheaply and poor quality, in order to be sold as a drug rather than to be sold as something that could be pleasurable and actually enhance your well-being rather than detract from it. Peter Lee is saying, evening Roy, can we wish Sheldon Kerr a happy 40th birthday too? I was with Sheldon last night and he never cracked a light, or I completely missed it. Of course we can. Is that today? Is that now? Oh my goodness. Sheldon, I'm feeling terrible now. Nevertheless, I've got a chance to make it up to you. I can raise a glass. I'm going to put down the 40%er and I'm going to raise a glass of the good stuff, buddy. And at least I was able to put a wee small gift in your hand, but you actually gifted me something in your birthday. Raise this wee glass, Sheldon, and say, many happy returns from me and all the barflies, buddy. Happy 40th. I hope you continue to enjoy your time in Scotland. Cheers. That's incredible, Peter. Thank you very much for reminding me. Thank you. So the First World War comes around, and there's even more reason for the politicians of that time to look at whiskey production and consider that those distilleries should really be doing something for the war effort rather than just making whiskey. So there was even more pushback on whiskey. And time again, they tried to put things in. It was the Chancellor at the time who eventually became our Prime Minister, famously David Lloyd George. And he was a teetotaler, and he was trying very hard to hamper the whiskey industry from producing at all, let's be honest. Not just the whiskey industry, but gin production, everything. He was just against alcohol consumption. And time again, he would propose legislation in order to make it difficult. In the end, as is always the case with politics, compromises were struck. They were going through what back then in the time, they never measured by alcohol by volume as a percentage. They were measuring by proof, and they had overproof and underproof. So they were measuring by degrees under proof in order to try and determine how whiskey should be presented and sold and what should be the right strength. In the end, they brokered a deal, and this was during the First World War. They brokered a deal as a means of compromise in order for whiskey to be 30 degrees under proof. And it was felt that that compromise was low enough for it to be, let's say, a more drinkable, accessible, softer, lighter ABV, but still retain the character, flavor, and aroma and everything that is whiskey. So the 40% minus, 30 degrees under proof just so happens to equate to 40% ABV. And that was it. It was put into law at that time. It passed, but then a double whammy came. Post-war, the government stepped in and said, here's a duty rise that you have to pay, Mr. Alcohol Industry. You have to pay this duty and you're not permitted to pass it on to the public. Pretty draconian. However, that's what happened. And that meant that 40%, that minimum 40% deal that was struck, it was almost impossible for the producers to go over 40% ABV because they would immediately be making a loss. Because the duties, the increased duties, it was not permitted to pass it on to the consumer. Crazy times, right? It's over 100 years ago now, but relatively recent. In time, that just became the standardized strength for whiskey. Huge caveat. Throughout tonight, we're going to be talking about whiskey in a very broad sense. So I'm talking about blends, malts, and grains. Let's leave blends in the middle, malt whiskey and grain. Malt whiskey is 100% malted barley, made in a pot still, minimum double distillation, aged in oak casks for a minimum of 3 years, all of that great stuff. Grain whiskey is made from other grains, including malt. So you can use wheat, corn, and rye and other things. Still call it grain whiskey. You can use oats or any grain. That's grain whiskey. That's not made in a pot still. It's made in a continuous distillation process through a coffee still or a continuous still, but it still has to be aged in oak casks for a minimum of 3 years. These, as I've just described to you, are both distilled spirits made from grain. They are both brown spirits. They are both whiskies, but they are completely different drinks. And the ingredients that they use and the process that makes them and the intended market, the intended end use of the product, they're completely different things, despite there being huge overlap. Some drams coming in here from David Hong, who always leaves a wee generous dram. Very rarely leaves a comment. He's the same tonight. Nothing, no comment there. David, thank you so much for your support and your generous dram. And noteworthy whiskey, that's Sheldon. He is in. It was fantastic. He's saying to connect with you yesterday, and you couldn't have been more welcoming and generous. Scotland really is an amazing place. Cheers, Roy. Well, I never got a chance to say happy birthday to you yesterday. So much chat and everything else, getting caught up in it all. I'm so sorry. I feel like I remember that it was mentioned now, and so sorry, my friend. And you're in here buying me a dram again. David Hong, thank you for your generosity. Sheldon, thank you for your humility and your generosity. Cheers, buddy. I'm going to dial down the brightness on the screen a wee bit. Hopefully I can still read. So there we have it. 40% became the standard. It became absolutely standardized, and whiskey was sold to the market for decades afterwards at 40% ABV. But back in the early 20th century, there were very few malts being sold at all. It made up less than 1% of all the whiskey sold would have been sold as malt whiskey back then. Everything was sold as a blend. It was all blended whiskey. So you tended to have this foundation, this grain component of a backbone in various different proportions and various different styles, flavors, profiles, made up by seasoning, flavoring, enriching with these malt whiskies that were added into the mix. That's just what whiskey was. The idea that anybody would want to buy individual styles of this really richly flavored, quite potent malt whiskey was beyond everyone. That just wasn't the thing. It was seen the right thing to do was to blend these individual components into something that could be made consistently and branded time and time again. That's the context of which the 40% legislation came into play. And that's where kind of still, I hesitate to use the word stuck with it, where we still have that today, regardless of whether we're talking about malt or whether we're talking about grain or whether we're talking about this huge kind of overlap in the middle, which is the blended market. Today, by volume, don't quote me on these numbers, by volume, it's still in the high 80s is blended malt of the market, still 80s percentage. Grain whiskey is very, very small. Blended grain whiskey even smaller. Single malt whiskey is getting bigger all the time by volume, but it's much bigger than that ratio by value. There's much more value and there's much more margin in malt whiskey these days. And that's thanks to the growth only over the last 20, 30, maybe 40 plus years. But it's been a slow build. We're still about that peak moment right now. By value, malt whiskey is much, much higher as a percentage. And that's where we're at. We're in a situation where the legislation covers these two drinks that are completely different things. It just covers all of whiskey, whether it's a blend, whether it's blended grain, single grain, whether it's blended malt, single malt. It covers them all. And I feel that this thing that suffers from that legislation, as we'll see tonight, maybe, as we know, because you're knowledgeable barflies, is of course our precious malt whiskey. Malt doesn't like to be treated the same as grain whiskey. It really doesn't, and it protests in certain ways. Lolander is saying it was good seeing you at the Fife Whisky Festival. It was good to see you, buddy. It was fantastic to stand with you for a wee bit and shake your hand, albeit so briefly. Wonderful to have you, buddy. Hopefully there's a chance to bump into you again soon. It was also too brief. It was Krishan, your name? I may be making a mess of your name, but Lowlander you are, buddy. It's good to have you in. Yuri Moggio is in being very generous tonight, and he's bought 10 Aquavite memberships, Barfly memberships, for 10 people that's tuning in and watching tonight. Good to have you. Thank you, Yuri, for your generosity, my friend. Cheers to you. Reb is saying, good evening, nice to be here, Roy. I'm drinking the newspaper and rum cask, chill filtered, coloured and 40% ABV, but it is tasty stuff and it's cheap, and I'm no whiskey snob. Well, Reb, you're in good company because I am a whiskey snob. I am a whiskey snob. Listen, I'm drinking a 40% whiskey here tonight, I really am. But I'm not loving it. And I'm certainly not drinking it because it's 40% ABV, and I'm certainly not drinking it because it's cheap. I have this on hand because it's a hangover, if you like, if you pardon the pun, from some of the vPubs I was doing in 2024, whereas we were looking at the top 10 best-selling malt whiskies, and of course, this was one of them that I found to be actually reasonably drinkable compared to a lot of the others, and this was Singleton of Duffton. If I'm honest, tonight, it's not tasting fantastic. I've had a few decent whiskies this week, Fife Whisky Festival at the weekend, amazing whiskey there. So for something like this to stand up to that is almost impossible. It's just not going to be able to do it. But this was very inexpensive. I think it was in the order of £30 or something like this when I purchased this. So Reb is right, it is cheap. But I think in whiskey, we're not after cheap necessarily. We're after good value. So we're after something that we can drink and say, I don't feel like I wasted my money on that whiskey. You can waste £25 just as easy as you can waste £125. So we're not after cheap, but we are after quality. 40% ABV is a wee bit of a frustration for me, specifically when we talk about malt, because malt is saddled with that legacy of how the 40% came around. So when malt was brought to the market as a big thing in the 1960s through Glenfiddich, and then followed on by, the Lafroigs, the Glenmorangies, the other brands and things that stepped in order to bring mass market malt whiskey to us, they tended to go out there at 40% ABV. It is now enshrined in European law. EU law states that whiskey, in order to be defined as whiskey, is 40% ABV. So it's not going to change anytime soon. That's kind of we're kind of stuck with that now, and it's law in other parts of the world as well. And it's a wee bit clumsy, I think, because I am adamant, and I'm not just speaking about it as a snob or a geek or an enthusiast. Grain whiskey and malt whiskey are completely different things. One is very, very tightly controlled by its ingredients and its distillation type, and the other one has a lot more flexibility around it. One is made in a batch and very, very expensive compared to the continuously produced product that is grain whiskey. So we've got a very high volume product made in a different way for a different end role than this very, very specifically heavily legislated product. And yet those umbrella terms just kind of broad brush the whole thing. Oh, it's all just whiskey. If you're going to make this legislation in order to describe malt, and you're going to have it you can't, there has to be other differentiators, I think, as well, because malt suffers from this. However, we'll continue to go through it tonight. Not everything for mass market is 40%. Occasionally, we'll see an entry-level mass market product that's at higher ABV, 43% ABV. I've got an example here for you tonight, just one that I just grabbed randomly. Here is another Diageo product, just out of pure coincidence. This is Glenelgan's 43% ABV 12-year-old. This is the only core range from Glenelgan, which is a wee bit of a shame, because the malt whiskey, when you do happen across, it's a very rare thing to get an independently bottled Glenelgan, but it's very decent malt whiskey. So why, when the Singleton series that I've just shared with you there, whether it's from Glenord, whether it's from Dufton, whether it's Glendullan, all of these three distilleries from Diageo combined to make this Singleton product, 3 individual single malts under the same brand, in order to compete with the juggernauts that are Glenlivet, that is Glenfiddich, these kind of big companies that are kind of trading the top place all the time. It takes Diageo 3 different distilleries under the same brand to get into that top 5 with their Singleton product. Everything I've just mentioned to you is 40% ABV. Now, where you are on the planet, another frustration, you may find yourself sipping some of the whiskies I'll mention tonight, 40% whiskies, at 43%. That's because these are at what we'll call, I've got some banners to keep myself straight tonight. I should have been using it. We'll call it, rather than kind of entry level, we'll call this slightly more premium. This is the export strength 43%. So you might say to yourself, Roy talks about, I don't know, Lafroig 10 at 40%. Roy talks about X, Y, and Z at 40%, and I'm getting them at 43. Is that a mistake? Well, no. It's because that product is at such a scale, it's a big enough product that it's worthwhile making a 40% product for domestic markets in places that we can export with a small e at 40%, Republic of Ireland, etc., and make another product at 3% higher ABV for export markets. So Lafroig 10 is a perfect example. We have 2 different variants of the same whiskey. One is domestic and one is export, and that's frustrating in the modern world, isn't it? Because we all get together and we talk about whiskey and we travel and we do these kind of things, and I think it's not fair that one's at 40 and one's at 43. Why is that so? Well, when it's export, rather than make a different product for every single country that it's exported to, they just make a broad product that can be exported everywhere. And some markets require 43% as the minimum for whiskey. So to broad brush it, they just put out a 43% product there, and that's the export product. It's all bottled identically, and then it's labeled slightly differently for the end market. But the specs inside are the same everywhere for all the export bottlings. South Africa is a perfect example, 43% ABV minimum. Now, let's go back to that legislation. Let's go back to the 40% thing. Let's not dance around. Let's not pretend. The reason that whiskey is 40% or 43% is because that's the minimum strength that the producer, and I hesitate to use this clumsy term, but it's true, can get away with. Whiskey is a business. They're there to make profit. They do not tend to lead with mass market products that are made to be as good as they can be. Mass market products are not made with that intention. Mass market products are made to a price point. They are made to make the owner as much money as they possibly can. So that immediately means that one of the easiest decisions to take is to put the ABV as low as it can possibly be. That wee whiskey I was sipping on tonight, that Singleton, like all the other whiskies I shared with you in the top 10s of last year, and most of the 40% mass market whiskies I will share with you in the vPub, absolutely suffer from that. There can be no debate. Nobody can stand up and tell you tales of how it's much more preferable at drinking strength at 40%, because that's just nonsense that the industry has been using for years. And they talk about ABV being an alcohol barrier and all of these. And there's another half dozen reasons that they've put that low ABV out there. But it's just babble to justify the low ABV, which is set for maximum profit. There's no two ways about it. There is never a time that a malt whiskey has tasted better at 40% than it has at higher ABV without chill filtration and without colouring added and all of these things. It just doesn't happen. It's a profit-driven thing, and we need to accept that whiskey is very business-orientated. And in order for it to be healthy and strong and go forward, business and profitability needs to be a focus. But don't tell lies. Don't say that you've put it out 40% because that is the pinnacle of drinking strength, because it's utter nonsense. And we know this, and you know this too, but the mass market doesn't know it. And the people that are buying the brands from the shelf and feel reassured that they're buying the best, they tend not to know it. So they get away with it. 43% proves that to us. Because we've got a 10-year-old Laphroaig at 40, and we've got a 10-year-old Laphroaig at 43 that we get to taste. And we taste the difference. And you do too. As a producer, you do too. This Glenelgan at 43, let's see if it steps up a little bit. We've got a similar product, another Speyside distillery from another, the same producer. Not comparing apples for apples here. We've got Duffton against Glenelgan, but they're pretty close. This is very, very typical Speyside whiskey. Orchard fruit, crisp orchard fruit. Sweet and appealing, light citrus, soft citrus. Not a lot of sparkle, wee bit flat, but not nearly as flat as that Singleton. The taste has got more sparkle and detail, more top notes, whereas this has been emulsified and flattened. There's detail in this. It's a small percentage, that 3% ABV, but it makes quite a difference. And I think that there's going to be a theme following ABV and tracking with intensity, tracking with flavor, tracking with concentration of flavor and aroma to an extent. Aroma we need to be careful about, because aroma is far more accessible at lower ABV. But in terms of whiskey lovers and passionate whiskey people on the palate, the ABV, that little ABV, makes a huge difference. I'm going to end up on a rant tonight. I need to be careful, but I think we'll save it until we get to the next step of the ABV ladder. So this is what we're calling the export strength at 43%. This is what we're calling slightly enhanced, slightly more premium, but basic mass market ABV. Jimmy Legg is in. Good to see you, buddy. Saying, I think I may have been emulsified and flattened as well. Not by chill filtration and fake colouring though, right? David is in. David, so good to see you. Ever so briefly, just over the phone the other night, he said, I had an eye-opener with Laphroaig Select. I found myself having bigger and bigger sips, trying to get the flavour hit I was expecting, and to find some complexity that wasn't there, and it's scary. Now, Laphroaig Select is quite a volatile product. It's not the same every time in the way it's made, but I think, going from memory, it tends to always be? Is it always 43%, David? You can let me know. And Jimmy is saying when you say good, you mean flavorful. Most people want as little flavor as possible, just not us. I don't think that they want that. I think that they don't understand that they want flavor. They just want something that's accessible, soft, and easy. I think you've got a point though, Jimmy. I think that a lot of people, and still the way that we market alcohol in general, not just the whiskey industry, they market it to an audience that just wants to drink and not think about flavor. So that's a wee bit different. We're conflating two different things. That's a wee bit different from what people want and what people understand. They're not even aware that flavor is a thing or it's existing. And if we start to bring that into the discussion, I think it's difficult to do it without coming across as pretentious or trying to take their fun away or something like that. So it needs guiding hands, it needs education, it needs canny marketing, it needs a lot less cynicism, it needs much more transparency and much more openness in order for that to be understood. People don't want flavor. If that's true, it's because they don't understand that the flavor can exist. Sean Causer is saying, let's not talk about the export 75 cl bottles when we get 70 cl. That's right, although it is changing because now that North America is accepting 700 ml bottles to sell on the shelves, those 75 cl bottles are a rarer sight these days, Sean. Sugar Kitty's saying, rant, I had no idea this was coming. Do I rant a wee bit? I'm sorry if I rant a wee bit from time to time. I think ranting can be effective if it's occasional, but if I just turned up and ranted all the time, I don't know. I want to evangelize about whiskey, of course. I want to be positive. I want to talk about things that are wonderful. But if things that are brought along that aren't wonderful or not as wonderful as they could be, then I think it's valuable to all of us, including whiskey, for the critique to exist, as long as it's measured and as long as it's constructive, right? Cheers, Sean. Cheers, Jimmy. Cheers, everyone. Cheers. Sipping the Glenelgan on the back of the Glendullan. Sorry, it's not Glendullan, it's Dufton, Singleton or Dufton 12-year-old. Both 12-year-old whiskies, 40% and 43% ABV, very similar, but the Glenelgan is twice as good, to the point that I would just keep going back to have another wee sip of the Glenelgan, and I wouldn't. I'd just start to ignore that 12-year-old Dufton at 40%. It was one of the better ones I tried in the lineup when I opened it last year, you'll remember, but it's a bit flat tonight. Justin Wands bought me a dram to say, show of hands, everyone, if you want a 3-hour rant-themed vPub. See, we don't want to dilute it, though, Justin. But thank you for your support. Thank you for your generous dram as well, buddy. Cheers to you. So if we talk about the rant, we've been in the realm where malt whiskey is compromised. If you're making it from barley and if you're double distilling in pot stills, you put all that effort into it. A much more expensive way to make whiskey, make no mistake. And then you put it into oak casks and you have to wait 3 years, and then you have to wait longer than that for it to be actually really good. All of this investment goes in, and then you take it out of that cask and it's perfect, and you strip it and you color it and you bottle it to make it as cheap as possible. It's just heartbreaking. And we've got grain whiskey there that's doing a really good job, especially when it's seasoned with decent malts, in order to bring a product that covers that mass market thing. It's blended Scotch whiskey. It's been a fantastic product for close on 200 years now. It can continue to be a fantastic product, and you can continue to use the existing legislation in order for it to be a fantastic, consistent product for that market. But malt is continually telling us it does not like to be treated like that. If you take malt whiskey and you dilute it down to 40% ABV, as soon as it gets cold, it's going to cloud. Most of the time, it's going to cloud over. It really is. If you strip it down to that low ABV, it's also going to lose a wee bit of colour as well. You might be able to access more aroma and things like that, and certainly the aromas and everything is a huge part of appreciation of whiskey. But those aromas are not lost if you leave it at a higher ABV. They are still there and accessible. We still have the ability to nose it at the higher strength or bring it down at home with water, play with it at home. But once you have stripped it down, we can't add more things to bring it back. 40% malt whiskey in order for it to be sold at that strength, it needs to be compromised. It needs to be chill filtered. If you chill filter malt whiskey, you lose flavor. You lose flavor and you lose mouthfeel and texture. If you don't believe me, I have industry records on hand that document trials of using chill filtration versus non-chill filtration. And the industry themselves state there are losses to aroma, flavor, and texture. We don't need those records, and you don't need me to sit here and tell you that that's the case, because you're knowledgeable whiskey folk, and you've got whiskey, and you've got a whiskey history and a journey behind you, a cookie trail of experimentation and enjoying whiskey, and you know that the whiskies that you fall in love with and you collect and you go back to buy a second bottle of, you know that the vast majority of those, nothing to do with snobbery, you just instinctively know through experience that those are the better whiskies when it comes to malt whiskey. The whiskey leads us, the whiskey teaches us. You can listen to me, talk till I'm blue in the face as much as you want, but your experience will betray a lot more than anything you hear from me. Craig McGinn is in here. Good to see you, buddy. How are you keeping? He's saying Aquavita evening run. Barflies, I need to catch tonight's vPub and catch up as we're in Arran with the family to celebrate my 50th birthday. March, it's the birthday month, isn't it? Tomorrow, kicking things off with a tasting at Lochranza. My goodness, Craig, your 50th tomorrow. Let's raise a wee glass for my pal Craig McGinn. Fantastic. 50th. It's a big one as well, buddy. To Craig, I'm going to raise a wee glass of the good stuff. To Craig, for your tasting tomorrow, for your birthday tomorrow, for your holiday, with your family, for everything, and for the celebration that comes with 5 decades, buddy. Many happy returns, Craig McGinn. Happy birthday, buddy. Bloody good guy as well. Graham Fraser is in, celebrating being a barfly for 59 months. I use my member post to wish Sheldon happy birthday. Fantastic. Lots of birthdays flying around as well. Wonderful. Gav, Sheldon, Noteworthy Whiskey Sheldon, Craig McGinn, all celebrating milestoners. 40 for Sheldon, 50 for Craig McGinn, and 70 for Gav Strams. I wonder who's going to come in and tell us it's their 60th. Jimmy, I'll try that, won't he? We know 50 years old is just a little baby. Aquavita, aye. Well, it wasn't that long ago for us, Jimmy, right? It wasn't that long ago, although it is getting longer and the alternative is much worse. So we're on this rant, we're on this thing. Let me move into the 46% ABV realm, and I'm calling that, this is just me calling it this is the Enthusiast Strength. And it's a bit of a window here. I'm suggesting that from 46 up into the late 40s, that kind of realm. So typical bottling strength of 46% ABV, 46.3 if you're one of the CVH, Exburn, Stewart, Distill, Heineken Group type products, 46.3. Thank goodness that they exist. Then you've got 46.8% from the likes of Ardnamurchan. You've got 48% from many other producers like Glengoyne for their legacy, and the 25-year-old, and Glengarry, a 12-year-old at 48%. Lots of 48% products as well. I think, am I right in saying the new Scappas, I think, came out at 48% as well. I might be making a wee mistake there, but it's a common percentage. And we lift up the bottle and we look at the bottle and we look at it and say, ooh, that's the Enthusiast Strength. Why? Because we believe it to be, and all other things being equal, we're talking about room temperature, 20 degrees C and all of that stuff. Things are different when things are colder, whether it's at bottling, storage, drinking, anything. But if room temperature of 20 degrees C, around about 45.7%, malt whiskey will not cloud when it's cold as easily. It stays much more stable at 45.7 and above because all the oils, the esters, the long chain fatty acids, all of these compounds that come out of solution at lower ABV stay in solution and they don't cloud. The malt, the whiskey, is much more stable. The malt is telling us that it's happier at that strength. It's much more content at that strength. It does not need chill filtered. So the flavor makes us happier. The flavor and the texture and the mouthfeel makes us much more content. This Malt whiskey is not the same as grain. We can't keep treating it the same, please. We need to preserve it. We need to listen to it. We need to look at it and what it's telling us. It doesn't want to be diluted and stripped and coloured. It's different. So there are a raft of whiskies in 2025, and there have been for a long time now, thanks to pioneers like Burn Stewart back in the day, 2009, 2010. They were one of the first to step forward and just say across the board, we'll do it at natural 46.3 and above. We have to shout out to the Janie Mitchell down in Springbank. They've known about this since the 1980s. They've been putting out their core Springbank products, and then they've brought back Long Row since, and they've brought back Hazelburn back onto the market as brands, if not the distilleries. But they have revived Glengyle Distillery and brought us Kilkerran, and all of this is and always has been natural whiskey. When Arran started in 1995, they very, very quickly worked this out and went down a path of following natural presentation. Arran have had releases out there that have not followed that template, but generally speaking, Arran tends to produce natural whiskey. And on the back of that, Kilchoman, we're talking about Daffmill, we're talking about, and all the new distilleries, of which there are 49, 50 plus new distilleries in 2025, with very few exceptions, have been following that same natural whiskey template. Why? Because they're trying to make the best whiskey they can. They're making malt whiskey, and they're following what the whiskey does best at. The legacy brands who were caught trying to cannibalize a blend market have been stuck with this huge weight on their shoulders. They've put in their malt whiskey out at the same specifications, the blueprint that blend left them with in the 50s and 60s, and they're stuck with it now. And unfortunately, we're stuck with it, but we're not buying it. We're not talking about it much. We remain the vocal minority. It's just the way it is. But the Enthusiast Strength is all about that signaling to us, to suggest to us that it's Enthusiast whiskey and it's non-chill filtered. To which I say, nonsense. More lies, more obfuscation, more hiding, more veils of mystery, nonsense. In order for it to be an Enthusiast whiskey, it needs to be something like this. It needs to say on the bottle, you see just here under my finger, it says, no chill filtration, natural colour. I don't care what your ABV is. You're forcing us to assume that that's the case. But you're putting out there at 48% ABV as an example. You're worried that it gets poured over ice and it clouds. You're worried that your customer is not educated. And so you chill filter it even at higher ABV. It might be that you do not do that as a producer, that you're 46%, you're 48%, you're 50%, your higher ABVs. It might be that they are not chill filtered. But unless you put it on the bottle, we are left guessing. You need to tell us, you need to share with us your policies on how you make, how you develop, and how you sell your malt whiskey. The ABV alone isn't enough. Glengarry 12, chill filtered. Glengoyne Legacy that I mentioned earlier, chill filtered. Glengoyne 25-year-old, a £500 bottle, 48% ABV, chill filtered. It's nonsense. This is precious malt whiskey that has spent years in high quality casks made by the most skilled hands that exist for whiskey making. And at the point of maturation, when it's at its ready, when it's at its peak, because it gets stripped at the bottling plant, it's heartbreaking. I think it's heartbreaking for a lot of the producers that make it as well. And there's just not a lot of wisdom out there. Malt is malt. It's not grain. Don't treat it like grain. It all goes bottled in the same place. You know, it's a tick sheet. What's the spec of this? What temperature do I put the liquid at before it goes through this equipment? You know, do we toggle on the chill filtration or not? What temperature is the chill filtration going to be at? All of this stuff. We need to preserve the wonder that is malt whiskey a wee bit more. It is a miraculous liquid. It really is. But when it's handled well, it's even more miraculous. This Craigellachie 13 is handled very, very well. I'm very grateful to Dewars, and I want to give Dewars a wee shout out. I enjoyed speaking to Tam and to Ross and the team up at Fife Whisky Festival. What a wonderful festival that is. Karen and Justine, what a great festival you girls put on. It's just such a good vibe. Small double-decker festival, 2 halls on top of each other, all independent distillers for the most part, all independent bottlers. So it's really nice to see Bacardi, Dewars, Aberfeldy turning up there with their products. They had a nice selection of Altmore, Craigellachie, and Aberfeldy, and some of the Aberfeldies were exceptional stuff, you know, really high age statement, precious, quite expensive stuff, and it's on free pour, and they're just sharing it. And I know that they had a lot of feedback along the lines of, why aren't more of your whiskies natural? How can these natural Altmores and Craigellachies exist next to these stripped and diluted, beautiful Aberfeldies that are missing so much? And they were they were quite pragmatic. They had to be, because of the nature of the festival and the type of clientele that were at that festival. They had to employ a bit of pragmatism. But can you imagine Aberfeldy 12-year-old if it was natural and treated like this? All that honey and honeycomb style that is Aberfeldy to be intact. Because when it's diluted to 40, it's just another also ran on the shelf. It's just trying to compete with all the other 40% whiskies, whether they be malt or something else. Anyway, Craigellachie, as we know, is something we love. Natural colour, unchill filtered. And we immediately step up. The difference, so the step from 40 to 43 was a step. Just one sip is this massive step up, because you've got this big hit, this lovely, gorgeous arrival. You need to do this. You need to do a wee lineup with something that you've got on hand at 40, something that you've got on hand at 43, mass market whiskies, and then find a natural kind of large scale outturn, a bit like a Craigellachie 13. Altmore 12 would be another fantastic one. A Loch Lomond 12, anything that's not been chill filtered. And the arrival it's profound. You've got this lovely sense of body and heft and weight. By the way, if I sip this Craigellachie in isolation, there's still a chance I could be using those descriptors because of the malt that this whiskey is. But it's not particularly heavy. It's not particularly, it's a very, very easy and approachable whiskey. What we have here is the body actually giving us something that some of us might describe as being, dare I say, smooth. The body, the weight, the oiliness, the texture, and everything helps integrate that sense of ethanol, alcohol. It's just, and the finish is ridiculously long compared to the fairly short finishes I've been enjoying up till now. It's massive. The difference is 3% ABV. 3%. But it's massive. It's malt whiskey being very expressive to anybody who cares to pay any attention that it likes to be treated in this way. 46% ABV, the Enthusiast Strength, is a fairly recent thing. Now, in small scale outturns, you know, back in the days before malt was marketed in any kind of proactive way, before it was exported in any kind of volume, you know, the malt whiskey would have been put out there at higher ABV, but you had to be close to the source. It just wasn't a big thing. Even Gordon and MacPhail, you know, the legacy independent bottlers and things, even when they were sourcing malt either as new maker or as mature stock or whatever, they tended to put it out there at the same specifications because that was what the market demand was, you know, the fairly ignorant market, you know, that malt whiskey was put out there at 40 and 43%. It wasn't until the Cask Strength releases came across. It wasn't until the likes of, think about SMWS in 1983. They weren't the first, but they were among the first to bring regular releases of fully intact malt whiskey to make people sit up and say, well, why doesn't all malt whiskey taste like this? Because all of it tends to be diluted down to the most profitable It's nothing to do with flavor, anything. It's just to do with making a buck. A buck can be made putting quality first. Blends and malts, they're constantly being forced. It's like trying to force a square peg into a round hole every time. Graham Young is saying, Alberta Premium Cask Strength Rye, 66.1% batch. Unreal how it sips so very well at this high flash point. You've brought that over to me, Graham, and we shared it. The very first Barflies meeting we had in the Glasgow casino, right? I never forget the manager getting the fright of his life by seeing all the whiskey that we were enjoying. And he'd given us this kind of blanket cover charge for all the whiskey. And one of the bottles he picked up was an Alberta Premium at 66.1% ABV. And he was panicking. And yet the very last person to walk out of that room was polite, upright, and shook his hand and thanked him for the night and left. He said he'd never seen anything like it. Whiskey folk. Lolander is saying, if you had a go at Dewar's guy about chill filtration lower ABV, I wonder how the guys at the Speyburn stand got on with you. I didn't go up to the Speyburn stand. I didn't get time. I didn't manage to get to all the stands. There's so many folk to speak to. Jeff is saying, yes, Aquavite, bring that smooth word back. Yeah, there should be no vocabulary off the table for talking about whiskey. As soon as somebody says you can't use that word. I remember being criticised for using the word grassy and being told it was lazy. It's like, what? Jimmy Legg is saying, drinking Craigellachie 13 against supermarket whiskey is really good, going to point out the issues with filtration and ABV. It really does. It did tonight, Jimmy. It really, really did. It's anecdotally, okay, I have to get no hard and fact. I can't gather data on this. But for years, I've been sitting around a table with people and offering them accessible whiskies that I think that they'll enjoy and they can get excited about whiskey by tasting. Never have they said to me that 46% is too hot and that 42%, that 40% or that 43% is in my lane. I can't be sipping that 46% one. If they are struggling to get into neat spirits and enjoy neat spirits, you encourage them to put a wee bit of water in all of the whiskies, regardless of whether they're 40, 43 or 46. Those type of people, you're not pouring, 58, 55, 60% ABV cask strength whiskies for them or whatever. You're pouring things that are easy to access, engaging it. And if they're very calm with it and neat spirits are easy for them, then you can crank up the ABV. But I find it a wee bit tiresome. I've accepted in the past that the lower ABV barrier is a thing, but in my personal experience, 3% does not make the difference. 40 to 43 doesn't make a difference. 43 to 46 doesn't. In my personal experience, even 6% from 40 to 46, because of the quality difference, demonstrable quality difference that's there, that doesn't make a difference either. It's about profitability, and we shouldn't hide from that. This North Star Linkwood 11-year-old, 51.9% says Ben is exceptional. A North Star Linkwood, fantastic stuff. And David is saying, I tasted the 10-year-old 40 versus 43, and the difference is obvious. I like to leave a comment in the Insta when they promote the 10-year-old. Are Europeans lesser consumers? My guerrilla evangelism. David, I wonder which one it is you're talking about. If you've been able to sip 40 against 43, buddy, see if you can catch me and let me know what that is. Fantastic to see Whiskey Mystery in. Wonderful to have you in, Phil. I hope you and Deepa are keeping well. Love you both. I love this wee Craigellachie 13 as well. Personal favourite of the Whiskey Mystery folk, Phil and Deepa. You'll be glad to know, guys, that I have a full bottle on hand now, rather than the dregs the last time that you were here. Still got a wee drop of your 19-year-old that you left me to. So now we move on to the kind of next tier, if you'll permit me to continue soapboxing here. And I'm talking about all this soapbox and stuff. It can't be next week because I've got, the topic next week is all about new distilleries, and is there still an appetite for new distilleries? Why would you build a new distillery in 2025? We're going to focus on kind of new distilleries and the dynamics and the challenges and everything. And in order to do that with any kind of weight behind it, rather than me just kind of shouting from the bleachers, right? I've reached out to Phil and Simon Thompson, who are joining me live on the vPub next week. Now, the sharp-eyed among you will notice very deliberately that will be the first guest session of 2025. So we'll be well into March, mid-March, before we've had a guest vPub. That's not a policy. It's not me saying that that's the way the vPub's going to be, but it was deliberate. And maybe, it's a bit self-indulgent. Maybe the vPub that we do the week after or at some point in the future will cover why I chose to do that. Anyway, I'm excited about next week to have Phil and Simon on talking about anything you want to talk about, but the main focus of our drive next week will be talking about new distilleries. They were the obvious people to invite because Dornoch, and now on the back of Dornoch, they've used that almost as a springboard. Independent bottling, Dornoch Distillery, Dornoch Castle, all of that is 3 springboards, if you like, to move into the new distillery that they've announced as Struy Distillery. So to invite the boys on next week, I'm really excited about. Enough for me to talk about the soapboxing. I'm glad you're indulging it tonight. We skip on to the next tier, if you like, of ABV strength. Where would you go after the Enthusiast Strength of 46? A lot of you would be tempted to jump immediately to Cask Strength, but there's two areas I want to talk about. And the first one is not soft premium 43%, actual premium strength whiskey. 50% ABV. And I've put in brackets here, that's equivalent of 100-degree US proof. 100 proof US is double the alcohol by volume. So bottled and bond strength, something like this wee bottled and bond mellow corn that I have here that I enjoy muchly. 50% ABV, I think, makes this a really quite chewy, rich, sweet, different take on whiskey whatsoever. If you doubt this whiskey, pour it blind for yourself, pour it blind for people. It's quite a compelling wee proposition, and the more I get to know this whiskey, the more I tend to love it. It's very, very different. Corn, bottled and bond, straight corn whiskey as well. 100 proof, it says on the label, 50% alcohol by volume. Bottled and bond. So bottled and bond, I think it has to be a minimum of 4 years or a minimum of 2 years. But if you bottle it at younger than 4 years, you have to put an age statement on it. So it's almost kind of a weird flip on things. A fantastic quality control for American whiskey, the whole bottled and bond thing. And this is a fantastic example of a 50% ABV whiskey. But there are Scotch producers that put out 50% ABV as their kind of baseline, as their entry level. I'm sure for you, the first thing that pops into your mind might be something like an old malt cask. They've been doing it for years. 50% was their preferred bottling strength. Now, they did have things that were less, and yes, they did have things that were higher, but generally speaking, where they had the choice and where it was appropriate, for 50% was a bottling strength. And that's not arbitrary like 40% is. No, there is reasoning behind it. Stick with me. You're thinking about Brook Laddie, aren't you? Classic Laddie, their 18-year-old, Port Charlotte's, all of that stuff. 50% ABV bottling strength. Thank you, Brook Laddie. Thank you, Remy Cointreau, for supporting it. There's a new guy on the block as well, Ardnahoe, on the same island as Brook Laddie. Ardnahoe came with their inaugural at 50% ABV. And we thought, okay, that's the inaugural. But no, the Infinite Loch, my whiskey of the year, that's come out at 50% ABV as well. They've just announced the Balsa, which is a brand new release, which is ex-Oloroso sherry release. Thanks to the marvellous bar steward at the Bonaccord last night, I was able to taste that last night well ahead of release. It's not coming out until either later in March or April, the brand new Ardnahoe. So they'll have 2 core ranges. They'll have the Infinite Loch and the Balsa alongside each other. Infinite Loch is a vatting of bourbon and sherry, and the Balsa is focused on predominantly ex-Oloroso sherry casks. 50% ABV, £55 for the Infinite Loch, £60 fully natural for the Balsa as well. The inaugural was a wee bit more expensive than that, but I put it to you, and I know from speaking to you a lot that you agree with me that probably the best inaugural that Scotch whisky has seen since its Renaissance started at the turn of the century. Or maybe the Renaissance started with Aaron. Let's give Aaron credit. Maybe Speyside Distillery, maybe Kinenvy, maybe a couple more that came before. But the Renaissance started, let's say, in the mid to late 90s. But the best inaugural, the best debut that we have ever seen, I'll take challenges on this, of course, is this whiskey. Just fantastic stuff. I'm saying it's fantastic before I stick my nose in, okay? Always taken aback by how sweet and how smoky it is. This is sweet, rich peat. Almost like a chocolate and cherry thing going on tonight, completely different. Bags of rich kind of tobacco. There's a lot of oak in here as well, suggesting kind of cedar wood and pencil shavings and that. So much going on, just a big hit of aroma. I notice I'm sticking my nose right in the glass at 50% ABV. A blender, somebody who's putting whiskey like this together, may be reducing this down considerably to nose it. But this is presented at 50 and I think it's perfect. My nose is quite happy sticking itself in glasses of 50% ABV liquid. Yes, you're getting some anesthetizing effects, but it's part of the pleasure. Rich plum and deep, rich, sweet cooked plum jam. A nuttiness, a brittleness, kind of like almost like a toffee apple toffee. Just terrific. And that's before I've even sipped it. Mouthfeel, chewy, big, filling, coating, all your palate, everything, it's all your receptors are like sparking. This is ABV. This is no doubt that there's the higher ABV that is being a conduit, bringing extra flavor, extra intensity. It's almost like a sensation of electrification. It is like your nerves are being fired. It's like on your gums. It's on your palate, it's on the roof of your mouth, it's all over your tongue. And it's the higher ABV that's doing that. This is 50% ABV. There are lots of producers out there, not just the bottled and bond, Cask, Bruichladdich, Ardnahoe. There are lots of producers out there that decide that 50% ABV is a good bottling strength. I mentioned earlier tonight, at the top of tonight, that my preferred bottling strength is 55% ABV. It's just a wee self-indulgent thing. But I think we can all settle on the fact that early to mid-50s seems to be the pinnacle. If you were to sit and list your favourite whiskies, independent bottlers in the mix, of course, it has to be for this exercise of the last couple of years. You might be surprised how many are in the 50 to 55% band. And that is not without reason. Stick with me. Jimmy Legacy, when I hear 50% is in any context, I think of my love for Bruichladdich. And you're not alone. You're absolutely not alone. Dr. Bones is saying, I hope this Ardnahoe Balsa doesn't refer to the cask maturation. Balsa would. Well, no, it's BH, okay, BHOLSA, Balsa, and it refers to caves on the island of Isla. So where they've named the Infinite Loch after water and naming the Balsa after caves. Brosky Bear is saying, do you smoke cigars? I don't, Brosky Bear. Thank you for being a barfly. Nice to have you here. It might be the first time I've welcomed you. I don't. I did in my younger years. And I have smoked cigars on special occasions, weddings and things, and just when you do that stuff, and it's not something I seek out anymore. I was a smoker once in my life, and I'm kind of glad that that's well behind me, buddy. But I understand the pleasure of it, and I understand how attractive it can be to match up with whiskey. Good to have you. And George is saying bottled and bond 50% and a minimum of 4 years. Straight whiskey is 2 years minimum. Okay. So I'm conflated. I'm getting a wee bit confused there. Straight whiskey is 2 years minimum. Bottled and bond is 4 years minimum. So, but there's something about straight whiskey's 2 years minimum, but under 4 years they've got to put an age statement on. Would that be right? Thank you, says Brosky Bear. You're very welcome. Good to have you. What else have I missed? Justin Ranson, better than Ardnamurchan's or inaugural? I would have to say yes. I mean, they're very, very similar ages, but they're very different characters. Ardnamurchan brought something for me that I will never forget. That 0920 was it? Is that the code? The AD 0920. The inaugural Ardnamurchan just knocked me out because there was never a sense that a 5-year-old whiskey could be that good until Ardnamurchan demonstrated that it could be. that minerality, that lovely outdoor sense, that wonderful freshness, the brightness, the detail, the just the inaugural Ardnamurchan. I've had similar experiences since with Ardnamurchan, of course. They're now really hitting their stride. There's a lot of maturity out there, a lot of playfulness, a lot of cask variety. But I would say Ardnahoe came later. You know, Ardnamurchan was launched during COVID, when the whiskey hype was at its peak. It was tough for them to go through what they did. Probably it wasn't a traditional launch for them, but they were literally, when I bought that Ardnamurchan, I didn't buy it. I was in a queue and I didn't get the bottle. It was Sevi that gave me his, knowing that he would get another one. But I was in a queue at Good Spirits Company and they were selling them out of boxes on the floor. That's the reception that Ardnamurchan arrived to in late 2020. Ardnahoe in 2024 arrived when the downturn was kicking in whiskey. They had to come in with a banger, and they brought to market, hands down, I will be challenged on this, no doubt. I'm happy for you to do so, but hands down, objectively, subjectively, everything in between, the best inaugural that we've seen in Scotch whisky. And the way I'm getting through their inaugural, I'm now on the lookout for another bottle. For you guys out there in further markets, you can still get it. It's sold out mostly in the UK now, but it's going to be, there's plenty, 70,000 bottles. Thank you, Ardnahoe. 70,000 bottles went to market, so it's still plenty of it out there. We can get it in secondary. It's gorgeous. 50% ABV. Let me tell you about 50% ABV. Thanks to Michael and thanks to Gus, I went out to a couple of friends to talk about some of these things before I sat down in front of you tonight. I'm coming to you as an enthusiast and not an expert, but fortunately, because a lot of whiskey enthusiasts also have expertise, a lot of them are open to sharing that as well. So heads up, and a shout out to Michael and Gus for helping me out tonight. 50% ABV. ABV is alcohol by volume. It's quite interesting. I ended up watching a YouTube short on mixing alcohol ethanol with water, and they were mixing 40 mils of ethanol alcohol with 60 mils of water. 40 and 60, add it together, right? You get 100 mils of liquid. No, you don't. You get 97 mils of liquid. So 40 mils of alcohol, 60 mils of water actually makes 97 mil, because we're dealing with different things. And when you mix it, you end up with another thing. ABW is alcohol by weight. And ABW is a different way to measure alcohol. Now, ABV, alcohol by volume, is an easy way for us to imagine it, right? We look at a bottle of whiskey, imagine it's a litre bottle for easy sense. It's 40% ABV. We know that 40% of the liquid in that bottle, theoretically, is ethanol, is alcohol, but that's not strictly true. Something interesting that happens as well, when you mix alcohol and water, you get it reaches its viscosity peak. So we're talking about mouthfeel, we're talking about texture. It reaches its viscosity peak at 42% ABW, alcohol by weight. It is absolutely no coincidence that that translates to 53% alcohol by volume. So I've just explained something that I don't fully understand to you, that's no surprise to anyone. As whiskey enthusiasts, much is the same way that we know that it's better when it's not chill filtered, better when it's not coloured, better when it's slightly higher ABV. As whiskey enthusiasts, we know that that magical band between 48 and 55% ABV is where all the best experiences are at. We're not necessarily reaching to hose it with water, and we're not thinking that it's flat. We're thinking that that's where the vibrance, that's where the life is. And how much of that is because of that texture, because of that mouthfeel. It's not just about the way that it interacts and the way it feels on the palate, but it's how it, on the finish, especially how it, on the development and the finish, how it interacts with our palate, how it coats our tongue, how it coats our palate, and how it helps it have a longer finish and a longer experience. Whiskies with a short finish, or they disappear, they are quite Moorish. You do go back to them quickly. Whiskies with a lot of heft and oil and texture tend to hang about a wee bit more. Challenge accepted. I'm picking up there from Luna Aaron. How about Ardnamurchan? Okay, yes, we did talk about it. We did talk about it, Luna. Thanks very much to Justin and Luna for bringing that up. We always have to mention how good the Ardnamurchan is. Arnie is in Doodle Drama saying the reason I'm drawn to higher ABV whiskies, and this is from a beginner as well, is because, sorry, I don't want to label you as a beginner, somebody that's more recently into Arnie. It is because of the added fun of unlocking drams with different levels of water. It's an added level of engagement for me that spreads out a dram. And I just, while we're on that, Arnie, it's very different. If I take this wee water dropper now, and I go into this Ardna hole, and I take a wee bit of my water, just a wee bit, this is just a few drops here, drop it in this Ardna hole, and what we've got now is water and whiskey in a chemical maelstrom right now in the glass. We might not see it, but there's more liquid in the glass. Sometimes you can see it. You love this asymmetry, this, the swirls and all of that kind of, this, you kind of see the havoc that's caused because it's chemistry happening in real time. Sometimes it can increase the spice, the woodiness a wee bit. It can give you this big peak up front of spice. Not really tonight. I think it's just softened things tonight. Really sweet orange coming off the glass now. Still lots and lots of smoke, so I'm sensing a bit of kind of almost like charred, seared, burnt orange rind. That, what I've just done, and what you enjoy doing with your Cask Strength stuff, Arnie, is completely different from what Ardnahole would be doing if they had added that water at the point of bottling. So maybe I've taken that 50% with that wee drop of water and that little amount of liquid, I've dropped it down to maybe 45%, let's say, just for example's sake. But I'm doing it in real time. It's chemistry in real time in the glass. If Ardnahole had done that and dropped it to 45% at the point of bottling, and we put the two glasses together, I suspect they would be very different. It's different things. So it's fun to play with it. But it's fantastic when we're given something at full integrity to start the playfulness. That's what Ardnahole have done at 50% ABV, which, incidentally, for the real true premium strength category, is the same thing that's been done by producers like Bruichladdich. Just as I'm speaking to you now, I also realised that Old Malt Cask, and I knew this, I've mentioned it, it's been mentioned to me very recently, Old Malt Cask and Ardnahole are owned by the same company, Hunter Lane. So obviously 50% ABV is a bit of a favourite for them as well, and probably for a good reason, and I hope it's a reason that they're aware of and they do very, very deliberately. That's just wonderful whiskey, whether it's got a drop of water in it or not. I'm glad you're enjoying playing with water. We need to understand that when you take a Cask Strength or high ABV whiskey and dilute it with a few drops or a teaspoon or a glug or a splash at home, it's different from if you'd bought that whiskey in a diluted form. It's very different. Okay, so where do we go? So before we leap into Cask Strength whiskey, I think we need to talk about 100 proof Imperial, right? The next kind of level. I don't have a banner for that, but it's not difficult for me to make one. Let's do that. How many spelling mistakes have I got in that? Good enough. I need to go and grab a bottle for this one. Bear with me. I had plenty of time to prep for tonight. This should have been in and done. I shouldn't be typing out banners and going and grabbing bottles for you, but it's all part of the thing that's doing it live, right? But I forgot and I left this out. This was just the first one that came to hand, but I think it fits quite nicely because we've just had a PT whiskey. So to have another PT whiskey, I think it's okay. Ordinary Dane is saying, what do you think of the pricing of Ardnahoe? I mean, it's a NAS for a high price in my eyes. Not at all. You're absolutely spot on. Okay, the inaugural was 5 years old with a 5-year age statement on there as well. The Infinite Loch and also the Balsa are both coming out non-age stated. If you do a bit of digging and speak to people and things, you can discover that they're also 5 years old. However, new distilleries, Ardnamurchan's a fantastic case in point. New distilleries are teaching us not to be focused on age anymore, to taste the whiskey, how much we've paid for it, how much value that experience gives us, and then compare it to other things, whether they've got an age statement or not, at a similar price point. The Infinite Loch is my whiskey of the year. The reason for that is that I put it up against all of its peers, all of its smoky peers, its peaty peers, and its not so smoky and peaty peers. And it stood very, very strong. The weakness that we perceived in the Infinite Loch was because we were comparing it to how good that inaugural Ardnahoe was. But when you compared it to its £55 peers, it was very strong. It was incredible. The Balsa is a different lane. I wanted them to go bourbon. Of course, it's my preference to go bourbon cask, but they've gone sherry cask. And maybe in the future they'll bring a bourbon cask, but for now they've gone sherry cask. And it's a wee bit more expensive because if you're using predominantly ex Oloroso, you're paying, £1,000 for a cask where other casks are £100. Now, of course, it holds maybe 3 times as much liquid, but it still ends up being a hell of a lot more expensive, and that ends up manifesting in the end product. So £60 for a whiskey of the quality of the Balsa, I don't think you're going to be offended by. I think you're going to be okay with it, Ordinary Dane. I think that we have to remember we're not talking about cheap. We're talking about value. We're not talking about, whiskey for specs and on paper on the label. We're talking about the actual quality and the sipping experience. And I will always, regardless of who the producer is, when they're able to bring that and demonstrate that, I will shout about it. If the Infinite Loch and the Balsa came with 5-year age statements, and then maybe next year or the year after they changed it to 6-year age statements, and then we kind of over the years it started to grow and become more mature and they put age statements on it, I think that would be fabulous. But I think we're not only speaking about a conservative industry, we're speaking about a very conservative marketplace that might get confused by these things. So I can understand that maybe they sometimes don't. Master Chief Sea Chest, that's Mark Hakala. I know I don't pronounce your surname very well, buddy, but it's wonderful to have you in. But Mark has joined the Aquavite Barflies. It's nice to have your support, buddy. That gives you access to all those wee Glencairn channel-themed emojis. You're keeping the vPub absolutely ad-free. Thank you for your support in general, buddy. It's nice to have you here, Mark. And a generous dram come in from my pal Alistair McPhail, superstar that he is. He's saying, a wee dram, Roy. You're not ranting, just sharing your passionate musings. You were looking for someone having their 60th birthday. I had my 60th something last on Sunday. Does that count? That's perfect, Alistair. Many belated happy returns to you, buddy. It's nice to have you in here, and it's nice to have you also buying me a dram when it's your birthday week. Cheers, Alistair, my friend. Cheers. Anyway. And here it comes, says Dan, 100 proof. Absolutely. So 100 proof American is just double ABV, so 50% ABV. So this is 100 proof. And anytime you see an ABV on a bottle of 57.1% ABV, there we go. That's 100 Imperial Proof. It's just the conversion works out at 57.1% ABV. Now, we've loved the value from Signatory Vintage over the years. We love that this range exists right now. Of all the people talking about this range, of all the people snapping it up and buying it up, and this has been starting to become a collectible now. They've been very clever because this is 100 proof edition number 28. So there's a collectability to this series now as well. And I don't mind that at all because at sub £50, £45 neighbourhood, this is marvellous, marvellous whiskey. When good value is brought to us, we're much more laid back. You know, I have to be honest, I'm yet to have one of these releases that really blows me away. I really think is incredible whiskey, but I've yet to have one that is anything other than fantastic whiskey and fantastic value. So the floor, the value floor is already very high. This is wonderful to have this. And nobody is complaining that it's 100 proof. We're all celebrating that it's 100 proof. This is diluted. It's very unlikely that any of this is going to be cask strength. It's not going to come out of the cask and magically be, maybe one or two bottlings might, but it's not going to magically be 57.1. So they're going to be higher ABV, and they've used water to bring it down to that 100 proof specification in order to bottle it. Why do I bring this up? I only bring this up to suggest to you that 57.1% ABV, 100 Imperial Proof can be cask strength, but just by luck. These, a lot of people are talking about these being the Cask Strength signatories. They are not. That's a different range altogether. Cask Strength series come in the decanter. The 57.100 proof series are adjusted to be 100 proof. That means that it's not cask strength, and you will not see the words or the phrase cask strength written anywhere on the label. Now, in general discussion as whiskey enthusiasts or clubs or meetings or hookups or whatever, we might refer to these as cask strength, and in the context of the discussion, it'll be understood exactly what we're talking about. But it's not something that is legitimately something we can call cask strength. Gav he's just in here saying goodnight. He was in here enjoying his 70th birthday this week. Gav, I know you're saying goodnight, buddy. It was nice to have you. I hope to see you over the course of next weekend. I'm looking forward to it. Angie said hi to you like you could hear it. Did you, Aquavite? I feel it. And certainly I hear it now. I can hear Angie's voice right now. Say hi right back to her, Jimmy. Thank you very, very much, buddy. Cheers, Angie. All of these lower ABV ones are still in the glass. The ones that the chewy things that I'm really enjoying, that Ardnahoe is just exceptional. I just love this stuff. Justin Mann is saying, I hope Glenfarclas 105 comes up. There's a 16-year-old release recently grabbing my attention. It's always amazing to me how you guys can almost read my mind. Predictability makes Aquavite a dull boy, right? Let's move on to Cask Strength, Justin. You were predicting everything I was doing last week as well. Let's move on to Cask Strength. So 57.1%, that high ABV, but it isn't Cask Strength. Why? Because Cask Strength, or as the Americans among us might know it as barrel strength or barrel proof, that is as it comes out of the cask. After maturation, whatever strength that is, it's bottled at and it's measured and it's labeled as such. And it's random. Whatever it's going to be, it's going to be. What's interesting is that we associate cask strength with high ABV, and that's not always the case. Cask strength could be much, much lower ABV. Theoretically, cask strength can be 40% ABV. It could be that over time, enough alcohol has been lost during maturation to reduce the cask strength down to 40% or very close. These things tend to be fairly tightly managed. They know when casks are dropping that low, and it tends to happen unless there's something bizarre or there's a kind of outlier. It tends to be that something that's very, very old. It gets quite old and it loses. I'm talking about Scottish maturation here. Our climate is humid and cool, so it means that we lose alcohol over water. If you look to the tropics, if you look to India, if you look at Cavalan, Texas, certain Kentucky as well suffers from this. You can look at hot climates where they tend to lose a lot of water. So the ABV actually, the alcohol-ethanol ratio increases and the ABV goes up. And then they're kind of intermediate. It was interesting. I met with Raphael Narbe when I was meeting up with Sheldon this week. Fantastic guys. His pals Philippe, Sheldon's pal Jay, and Leandro. We were all hanging out and enjoying drams together. And Raphael told me that in Brazil, it's very stable. They lose equal amounts of water and alcohol. So while the liquid becomes more concentrated, the ABV stays stable in Brazil. I'm talking about Union Distillery specifically. That was interesting to hear. So it depends very much on environmental um, uh, factors, how you are going to end up viewing what is described as cask strength. Warner, the one glass man, has bought me a generous dram to say it's a big round number for me next Star Wars Day, a day before yours, right, Roy? So you're talking about, we both have Star Wars birthdays, that's right. You're May the 4th, and I'm Revenge of the 5th, right? Fantastic. That's your spot on, Warner. It's nice of you to mention it in well in advance. And remind me that your birthday is May the 4th. I'll raise a wee glass. This is the slightly potent whiskey that I'm raising for everyone's birthday tonight. Many happy returns when it comes round, Warner. It's good to have you in tonight. And Jesse Artanzalo is celebrating being a member of the Barflies for 39 months. Good evening, Aquaviti and Barflies. Nice to have you in, Jesse. So, as Justin has pointed out, this is not low ABV. This is Glenfarclas 105. So this is 105 Imperial Proof. So that extra 5 is obviously the 2.9% ABV. That's the difference between 100 proof, 57.1 to 60% ABV this is. Glenfarclas 105. It's been around since 1968. It was the genesis of cask strength, mass market, widely available, widely with a very small W, widely available whiskey on the market, Glenfarclas 105. It's a legend. And one of the things that's legendary about it is that it states cask strength on the label. And to be 105 proof, Imperial Proof, every single bottling has to be 60% ABV. And I've been caught out on this in the past. I made the mistake thinking that in order to get this to 60% ABV, Glenfarclas VAT it all together, whatever it is, 64, 65, 66, 68, whatever ABV it is, and they bring the strength down by dilution and the VAT, and then bottle it at 60%. That's not true. They VAT to 60%, which must be challenging. Anyway, that's how they arrive at it. We're going to be talking more about, in the next categories that are coming up, how Glenfarclas have been able to do, this used to be an age-dated product. This bottle that I have in my hand actually is age-dated. On the back label, you might not get to see that. If I hold it to the light, yeah, you can. You can just see 10 years down here. There's a 10-year-old age statement on this one. Most Glenfarclas 105 don't have an age statement on the label. They don't have an age statement. But they've had age-stated Glenfarclas 105 in the past, to the point that Glenfarclas were able to put out a 40-year-old Glenfarclas 105 at 60% ABV. How do you get to 60% ABV after 40 years? Well, we're going to talk about that in the next category. But for now, we're talking about cask strength. To put cask strength on the bottle, and it has been abused in the past and it may get abused in the future, you cannot have diluted it in any way whatsoever. The strength that it comes out of the cask, natural cask strength, has to be what it goes into the bottle at. It's the only way that you can use the term cask strength. It must be challenging to VAT 60% and maintain the flavour profile. I put it to you that we know Glenfarclas don't seem to put a lot of emphasis on maintaining consistency, because you can have a sparkler of a Glenfarclas and then struggle to get the same experience when you go in and buy a backup bottle, whether it's the 10, the 12, the 15, the 18, the 21, the 25, whatever Glenfarclas you're talking about. Glenfarclas have the capability to put out fantastic products based on the fact that they make bloody good whiskey. I sometimes wonder how their policies in terms of putting together a consistent product, honestly. In my experience as a whiskey botherer, Glenfarclas is up there for perhaps being one of the most inconsistent, and I don't mean flavour profile consistent, I mean inconsistent in floor of quality producers that's out there. I've had wonderful eye-watering experiences with bottles of Glenfarclas, only to discover that a backup bottle is half as good. It's a wee bit of a shame and I don't understand it. Never got to the bottom of it. Bronski Bear is a great show. He's saying thank you very much for your compliment, buddy. It's nice to have you in if you're going to say nice things. And Stevie O, the superstar that Stevie is bought 20 Aquavitae memberships. For lots of you, it goes out to random people that are just tuning in and watching along with this stuff that I'm talking about tonight. Means that you can all become Barfly members support if you decide to hang about. I still see 31 thumbs up. That must be wrong. I'm going to refresh this page. I'm sure if I never ask for thumbs up, but I've remembered to do it tonight, so it's 194. That's much better. That makes me feel much better. It means that somebody coming along behind you will realise that we're talking about legitimate stuff. It's legitimate content. Thank you for leaving a wee like down below. It means a lot. All right. So we're pretty clear with what Cask Strength is. Let me give you an example of Cask Strength. The one that I've been raising. How many of you are in? Just under 300 of you in tonight. Okay. This is in the public domain now, so I have to share it with you. I have to talk about it now. The one that I've been raising a glass to all of you to wish you a happy birthday. I'll show you the back label first. It's a very recognizable bottle, but do you see that logo there? The Recycled Review logo, the Wheelie Bin logo, and here you see the Barfly logo. Yes, this is for us. This is our community bottling. This is for us to buy and share and drink together. This is a legitimate bottle of 2009, 15-year-old Daft Mill Aquavitae Barfly's bottling. This randomly is just bottle 44 of 362. I'm dreaming. I can't believe that this exists. It's wonderful, wonderful privilege. It's wonderful whiskey. This is bottled at 55% ABV. So it is on theme tonight because this is 55% ABV. It's not only my favorite bottling strength. You might remember the Loch Lomond the first one that came out almost made it at 54.9, but that was the genuine ABV. So it went out at 54.9. The Ardnamurchans that we released went out at 55, and that was ordered to stabilize them to bring them to the same ABV. The Loch Lomans that we brought out after that, we tried, but one of them was quite a wee bit lower, so we just left the other one a wee bit higher. And this one, just out of pure coincidence, vatting of cask 53 and 55, I'll explain why I did that in a minute, has come out perfectly at 55. It was meant to be, right? So let me just tell you everything that's going to happen with this. Patrons get to know about this first. The reason that I'm sharing it with you tonight, it's in the public domain, it's out there on social media, people are sharing pictures of it, and because it was shared at the Fife Whisky Festival. Daft Mill is a Fife distillery, of course it's at the Fife Whisky Festival, and Francis took along a bottle to the festival, and he was pouring it for barflies and people. It was one of the under the table pours, and I also took this bottle with me to the Fife Whisky Festivals, and I shared it with my friends, with the Glasgow Whisky Club on the bus on the way up there. And I was getting feedback and things from everyone to let them taste it, let them try it in advance. So this is an advanced bottling. I don't have stocks of this. This is an advanced bottle in order for me to do tasting notes and take photos and things such as that. I hope I remember to take photos of this. So this is coming. It's not something that's kind of in the air or in the ether. It's actually here now. At the end of March, this will hit the market and it will go to patrons like every other release that I've done so far. Listen, I know that it's difficult. It's a paywall thing. But listen, the reason I exist, the reason the vPub exists, the reason this channel exists, the reason the Oswas and Dramface and everything exists is because of the support from patrons over the years. Of course, I'm going to prioritize them. It's just the only way that it can work fairly. So they're going to know. I was supposed to do a lock-in last Sunday night, lost my internet, as you know, but we've postponed it to Sunday, which is better because there's more details and I can share more with you of how it's going to work. But this exists and I'm in love with it. I'm absolutely in love with it. It's nice when you can get excited and feel proud, but to have something, it's a pure privilege. It sparkles, it's bright, it's intense. Despite being 15 years old, there's lots of intensity here. That ABV has come down to a natural 55%. The 2 casks mixed together have come together at 55. Why did we pick 2 casks? We had the pick of anything that we could have, and I chose bourbon. Everybody else, single cask out there, they're all going with sherry, and there's wonderful Daphne sherry casks out there. I wanted bourbon. But there were 2 in particular that were up there. One of them was very top note, and the other one had this lovely, big, intense arrival, this kind of dense arrival. So I wanted, it doesn't always work, but I broached the idea of, do you think if we mix these, they might work together? So Francis went and got the vials out and the measuring, the syringes and things, and we started to draw from samples. And then before we went round the warehouses, we covered off the samples and we went off and searched, and then came back to see how our experiments had been doing. And this, I had the consensus on the day. We were all sipping it blind and passing it around, and I got the consensus on this. So we've put together a double single. It's getting called a double single. It's a very brave thing to do because everyone wants single cask. We don't care that it's single cask or small batch or whatever. We just want good whiskey. Francis was excited to support the project, and we have 2 casks together as a double single at 55. And that 55 is natural cask strength. You would taste this, and I think you would. I think Daphmel is quite unique. It's often easy to spot. If your palate's in the right place, you can sip that and go, that's a Daphmel. And that's classic Daphmel. But there's also a sense of, you would almost maybe be fooled into thinking that there's floor malting or something going on here, such as the kind of, I don't want to use the word farminess because it just seems obvious, but it's a legitimate word to use. It really is. It's fantastic. Anyway, that's a wee heads up for you. Patrons will know all about it on the lock-in on Sunday night. I'm looking forward to hanging out with you on Sunday. And then should it not all get mopped up inside Patreon, some of it will make it out to public sale after that. Follow me. Justin Wan is saying, terrible bottle. Couldn't you have sawed off the neck a little bit to let it fit in our cabinets? That's right. I don't think you're going to complain, Justin, about the size. You'll be quite happy to find a special place for us when to go. Ginger Genius is saying, it's times like these that make it all worthwhile. Well done, Roy. Well, John, I hope that when you get a chance to get your nose in it and have a wee sip of it, you can let me know what you think. And he's also filling up the chat with wheelie bins as well. Is that Daphmel still available? Erwin, it's not gone on sale yet. Erwin, you're a patron of mine as well, my friend. Don't worry. Keep your eye on the patron feed. Join us on the lock-in on Sunday night and you'll know all the details. Take my money, says Peter Lee. Super excited about it. Peter has been from the start. And Danny Hemmington is saying, I'm a cigar smoker. I love farminess. Yeah, there's a kind of farmy quality that I find can come from floor maltings. The best example is probably that Benriach. They do, so Benriach have got floor maltings, of course, but they do a specific release. Am I ruining the quiz at the end tonight? I should stop speaking. It's a good example. Scott McIntyre saying, cannot wait for this release, Roy. Good to see you, Scott. Good to have met you as well. I'm glad you're excited for it too. Danny Hevington is saying, I'm a cigar smoker. Scott, I think you got to taste it, didn't you, at the Fife Festival? Danny Hevington is saying, I'm a cigar smoker and I love sorry, Danny, it's good to have you, and I already picked up your comment, buddy. So we're clear on what Cask Strength is, okay? But before I finish off, and before we get into some of these really kind of fun releases, like really high ABV, ridiculous, comical strengths, I think one other example of a really good Cask Strength bottle, while Peter Lee is in, is to bring a wee example of the community helping me out. Peter Lee was down visiting Campbelltown. Just so happened the shelves are full of local barley. They're not available anywhere else at all sold out. But if you make a pilgrimage to Campbelltown, you're able to pick one up. And he was thinking, oh, I wonder if Roy's got a local barley this year. He messaged me, he said, sent a photo. And I said, yes, please. The next thing you know, dropped off at the Bon Accord from my pal Peter. For 2 consecutive years in a row, thanks to the community, Sid Martin last year and Peter Lee this year. You know, I know that I'm near Campbelltown, but it's still like a 5-hour trek, right? It's like maybe not 5 hours, but it's quite a trek down the road. Peter Lee manages to do it in a day. Oops, I've just torn that. But it's still tricky for me to get local barley. And certainly over the COVID years, I never got anywhere close to it. But whiskey finds you from time to time, and I hope that if it's local barleys and things like that that you're after, that it can find you too. But here's why I'm opening it for you tonight. This local barley, all local barley, the ABVs tend to be quite punchy. This one's 58.1% ABV after 8 years, we believe. Why am I saying we believe? Well, even golden boys, or sorry, golden teams, sorry, like Springbank, can do with being a wee bit more transparent, I think. I wish they put batch numbers on some of the products. All other products, is that too much to ask? But they don't mention anywhere on the local barley that this is natural cask strength. So I have to do what I have to say, you know, if you're not going to put it on the label, we're left guessing, that type of thing. Yeah, they're very transparent. So if you were to ask Springbank, is this cask strength? Is this natural cask strength? They would say, oh, yeah, it's absolutely cask strength. But I can't find the words cask strength anywhere on this bottle. And we don't always have the access to the producer. Anyway, local barley getting opened in real time. Jimmy likes saying, I'd ask you not to drain that local barley, please, please. Jimmy's hoping for a wee toot on the local barley. Jimmy, don't worry about that. We'll find a way for you to be a part of this thing if such is your desire, especially if you're generous and buying me drams. My goodness, there's no need for it, buddy, but I'm grateful. Jimmy Legg, here's one for you and Angie. Cheers. I'm not, oh, okay, I'm not going to just dive in. I'm going to take a moment here. So it's almost like I've taken that concept of farmy, the floor malting thing, all that kind of stuff. I've noticed this, and it's just kind of exaggerated that whole concept. It's really kind of dense and fudgy and mulchy, and it's moist tobacco. It's mulching leaves. It's soil. It's compost and earth and heaps of sweet citrus, sweet orange juice, fresh clementine. There's some kind of green thing going on, like a florist maybe, or it's greener than, it's not floral, it's kind of more leafy, hedgerow, something like that. Not tomato vine, not that kind of, not mentholy, not going into mints and things. Maybe a wee bit eucalyptus. Fantastic. So let me read the details on this. This is an 8-year-old, which I think is the youngest local barley to date. This single malt Scotch whisky has been distilled from barley grown in the Kintyre Peninsula within a few miles of Springbank. The barley is then malted on our own malt floors using traditional production techniques before it is turned into spirit, matured into whisky, and bottled on site, making this 100% Campbeltown single malt. The barley source is High Ranachan. The barley type is beer barley. It's distilled in July 2016, bottled December 2024. 13,500 outturn of bottles, 58.1% ABV at 8 years old, giving us this, we believe to be cask strength whiskey. Now, usually they tell us a wee bit about the casks, but I would suggest from nosing this, it's a vatting of bourbon and sherry. It's quite a wee chunk of sherry in this. Cheers, everyone. Really intense. What a contrast. And I never sipped any of the signature peated, but there was a peatiness on the palate from the Ardnahoe that when I went into the Daft Mill, I noticed the contrast there. And then I come into this local barley Springbank, and I'm noticing a big contrast here. And it's suggesting a wee bit of, there does seem like a sense of quite a light puff of smoke here. But I think that I could be conflating that. I could be confusing it with just the intensity of the quite dense liquid. wonderfully rich. Nothing is shouting louder, not sherry, not bourbon, not spirit. This is 8 years old. And it's confident at 8 years old. It is the youngest local barley I think that's ever been released. I've got some of last year's up there that's only got that much left in the bottle. Sure, it's going to taste a wee bit softer, but it'd been interesting to taste the two side by side. It's so rich. A wee bit of a cocoa note in there, almost like a powdered cocoa. Okay, I don't need to stand in front of you and show off the fact that I've managed to get for 2 years in a row another local barley. I'm pretty close to the source. I do have friends that are fortunate enough to be getting up and down there for me to get it. I know it's tough for all of you to get it as well. It's worth seeking out. If you do go down there, try and time it with a release of the local barley. Peter Lee is saying, cheers to you, Roy. My life has flourished by the helping hands of the Barfly Whisky Live. A life that I never thought it would be. A life that I never thought it would be. An amazing ambassador for life, Aquaviti. Thank you, buddy. You are an amazing ambassador. And you do a hell of a lot for our community. The restless Peter Lee. Tireless in your dedication to looking after folk. Doesn't the local barley break one of the pieces of equipment all the time, Aquaviti? I can't remember which one it was. I don't think it breaks it. It's really difficult to handle, right? So if you speak to people at Springbank, they'll love Hazelburn. It's really easy. It's unpeated. It's triple distillation, but in terms of handling the malt, the grain itself, which is a very rare thing, there are very few distilleries in Scotland that actually handle the malt. You speak to them, Hazelburn's easy. Springbank's a wee bit harder because it's partially peated and things like that. There's peat to be worried about when they're kilning as well. Longrow's harder again because it's heavily peated, but then local barley, the grains are it's not plump, farm ready, quality controlled big grains. They're smaller grains. They're harder to steep, they're harder to malt, they're harder to dry, they're harder to process, they're harder to handle. And because of the grain, they're actually heavier. And the team at Springbank they hate the local barley shifts. When they're doing local barley, they dread it. It's harder for them to work with. That's why we've got a 90 quid bottle, an 8-year-old 90 pounds bottle. This takes a lot of effort. It shouldn't exist. If Springbank were following the same policies as all these companies out there doing 40% whiskey to make it as cheap as possible, to make it to a price point, if Springbank was doing that, if they had that ethos, if that was their ideology, this glass of whiskey would not exist. They're dedicated whiskey folk. That's what's producing this whiskey. It's a rare thing. Everyone cottons on to the fact that it's rare. Everyone understands that it's special, which is why everybody trips over themselves trying to get hold of it, which is why it doesn't make it onto many shelves very far. It's braw. It's really good. Okay, we've been through the Cask Strength thing. Now we're going to talk about our last category before we spill into the quiz at the end. After we have a wee bit of fun with some of the highest ABV. And what I'm going to put in my last clean glass tonight is the highest ABV whiskey that I have on hand right now. You can start guessing if you want. You can also start sharing your own highest ABV in the chat just to have a bit of fun with it. Be interesting to see what you've got. Aquaviti says Justin 1. Hopefully there's sort of local barley labour bonus in their pay. I hope so. I hope that the staff are able to pick this up and maybe keep it and put it aside as a wee nest egg or something like that. I'm sure they are. I hope they are, Justin. So now we move on to the last kind of ABV category for tonight, and that's to talk about still strength, receiver strength, and fill strength, and why they are so. We often conflate these three things. They're very, very different things. Let's start here. Let's start at still strength. The still strength is variable, okay? We know about cut points. We know about the heads, and then there's a cut point, and then it runs, the heart of the spirit runs until we get to the tails, and we cut the tail. And the narrower the cut, the more pure the spirit is, the less off notes, the less challenging notes, the less meatiness or sulphury notes or whatever it has. But if you widen the cut either to the front or the end or whatever, the wider the cut is, the more you harvest sulphury, more challenging notes. It's just every distillery has a different cut point, and it's quite interesting. It seems boring at first, but once you get into whiskey, it's quite interesting to understand what they're after and how their process works and what's their most desirable cut point actually is. So still strength, the spirit coming off the still is going to be variable. A typical cut points in Scottish production, double distillation would be coming off the second still, somewhere in the kind of early to mid to high 70s would be when the cut starts. And it runs down until usually mid 60s, but sometimes much lower than that, depending on the distillery. So that's the strength that the spirit is coming off the still. That is still strength, sometimes conflated with receiver strength. So that spirit flows through and it ends up in this gathering tank. This receiver is eventually going to be the thing that's used to fill the casks. And that is then going to level out. It's going to not be variable. That receiver strength is something that's going to be something that can be measured. As it's in that receiver, it's going to also have the ability to be potentially, not always, but sometimes diluted to fill strength. And that's the strength that they're going to fill the casks with. So those are three kind of different things that we all kind of talk about, but the context betrays what we actually mean. So most people understand what we're actually talking about, whether we use still strength receiver or fill strength. I'm not in the industry. They've maybe got more nuance, more context that they would use these terms in. But for us as enthusiasts, I think what we're actually focusing on is whether or not the spirit that ends up in that receiver, that gathering tank, whether or not that's reduced before it fills the wood. Let's talk about that. Sean Cosler is saying, finishing with an SMWS Highland Park. It's 62.8% ABV, a 13-year-old ex-bourbon hogshead. Delicious. Glad you're enjoying it, Sean. That's a punchy ABV you've got there. Danny is on the highest I have is a 12-year Deanston Golden Cask at 65.5. We're talking about Scotch whisky here. Let me tell you in a second why 65.5 is a remarkable strength. Justin Wan is saying a small drop of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. It's 68.3% to finish off the session. Fantastic. Thank you for being in the spirit of things, no pun intended, Justin. Helen is saying 67.4 for us. That'll be your Craig Ellicky, right, Helen? Not as hot as you'd expect. So you're talking about the drinking of that, not drinking at 67.4. Justin is saying, hopefully there is some sort of local barley labour. I picked that one up, Justin, didn't I? And Justin is saying that these three strengths could be a topic of discussion next week. Aye, when Phil and Simon Thompson is on, absolutely. So, still strength, receiver strength, filling strength. The filling strength in the Scotch whisky industry, and it's pretty standard these days, and we all know what it is 63.5% ABV. Why is that? Well, they had to agree on what the strength was going to be because for reciprocal trading agreements, whether that be by cask, by IBC, the big plastic containers in the cages, right, or tankers, if they're trading a new make spirit in any way, then probably it's going to be much easier if everybody's trading the same alcohol content, right? If it's going to be the same 63.5 for 63.5. So there's that. It's trading, but that becomes less valuable the more mature the spirit gets, because obviously that becomes much more variable depending on the cask integrity, the environment, the temperature, the climate, everything. But for new make, 63.5 makes a lot of sense for trading, right? It's also got a lot to do with the optimum interaction between the spirit and the cask that it's in. Now, not all wood is going to behave the same way. European oak, American oak, going to be a wee bit different. What's the previous incumbent ingredient and things, how it's been conditioned, how it's been treated, toasted, dechar, rechar, first fill, virgin oak, all of these things are all going to be a wee bit different. But generally speaking, 63.5 is also a compromise, nothing to do with trading, but a compromise between spirit integrity, cask interaction. So generally, as a rule of thumb, the lower the ABV, the more cask influence you're going to get. The higher the ABV, the less cask influence you're going to get. The spirit is much more robust with more ethanol in there, so it's going to be able to preserve its character, its strength for longer. Generally, it's a very, very rough rule of thumb. Also, when times are tough, when wood is expensive or precious wood, valuable wood, wood that is deemed to be something that's getting laid down for much longer term maturation, it's tempting, or indeed policy or very deliberate decision making in all of those scenarios, to fill the casks at full receiver strength, to not dilute at all. Why, if times are tough or the wood is precious, or if you're laying down for the long term, why would you mature water? So there's often the scenario where 63.5% goes out the window and things are filled at closer to 70% would be a typical receiver strength. That happens. It's not typical. It's a much smaller percentage of Scotch whisky, but for various reasons, now and in the past and throughout history, things have been filled at much higher ABV. Some people are nervous about doing that, being quite destructive to the wood, worrying about kind of short term and effects that it might have. So these tend to be very deliberate, considered decisions when that happens. But it can also be when the distillery just falls on hard times. I've got some stats given to me by a friend who suggests that 100,000 bulk litres at 63.5% standard industry filling strength would need 50 barrels. You need 50 barrels in order to take care of the 100,000 litres. Whereas if you were to bring it up to 73%, sorry, not bring it up, leave it at 73%, you would only need 44 barrels. So the cost of 6 barrels, that's saved. So that's, for every 100,000 litres, you're saving 600 quid, something of that order. And when times are tough, these things are going to add up. If you carry that forward to precious wood like precious European oak, ex-sherry casks, something that's been a lot of investment in, that becomes even more impactful because it's not 200 litres in a barrel, it's 600 litres in a butt. They don't want to put water in there. So fill strength is a thing that plays out. Now, remember what I was talking about maturation in different climates. Texas, the ABV goes up. The same in Taiwan, the same in India, the same in these tropical climates. ABV goes up. And in Scotland, the ABV drops. We've been talking, there's Highland Parks and various other things in the chat tonight, Scotch whiskies that are higher than that 63.5% ABV. It's very unlikely that they've been put next to a heater in the warehouse, right, to evaporate the water. More likely what's happened there, we're talking about things like, famously, Highland Park is one of the best examples. Some of the Edrington group whiskies, like Highland Park, but also Glenrothes and potentially Macallan. I don't know, we don't touch that much, but Ben Nevis and various other Brookladdies, famously back in the day, various other distilleries are pretty famous for filling wood at much higher than the industry standard 63.5, and that's where that comes from. James is saying Aquavita, it must happen at Highland Park, Craigellachie, and even Deanston at times. Absolutely, James. A lot of their indie bottlings at Cask Strength are crazy high ABVs. Spot on. Kyle Taylor is saying, does Ben Nevis bottle at receiver strength a lot more than others? I see a lot of their bottlings at overproof. You're spot on. So that overproof is that archaic term when they talk about proof plus. That's where the overproof comes from, and that's exactly, you're spot on, Kyle, with that assumption. And Ben Nevis were very active. There's a lot of famous high ABV Ben Nevis out there. Also, consider Diageo back in the day. Remember the rare malts appearing in the 1990s? Maybe you don't remember, but you know of it. Most of the rare malts were very high ABV because they were filled. It was a very specific thing. They were filled at much higher ABV than the standard 63.5. That's why we can see St. Magdalene at 63 point odd % and things, even with 19-20-year age statements on the bottle. Jimmy Legacy, have you discussed this with Michael Henry? You might find that this is exactly the type of subject matter you'll hear me bore Michael Henry to death with. It's exactly what I'm going to abuse him for. Exactly. Spot on, Jimmy. The same calculation done at 46% versus 40%, and bottle yield scares me. Well, that's exactly why the bottle yield is a big deal for profitability, Justin. It's nothing to do with making it accessible and bringing people into whiskey and all of the nonsense. It's about making whiskey to a price point. Kyle Taylor is saying, remember the bottles in the 1990s? I was 10. Kyle, I made a mistake there. In the 1990s, I was drinking whiskey, but I was certainly not appreciating whiskey. So let me just fix that. And Kyle, it's nice that you were 10 in the 1990s. It's nice to have some younger folk than me hanging about this wee environment. And I'll try and remember not to make the mistakes like that in the future. So there we go. Hopefully that sheds a wee bit of light on things like the various different strengths. I might have been clumsy tonight. I might have made a few mistakes, but that's what the community is about. I'm just an enthusiast. I'm not in the industry. Please correct my mistakes in the comments. I'll be sure to do my best to highlight them. But hopefully there's been some interesting things for me to share with you there. Before we get into the quiz at the end, though, we're going to do the thing I promised. We're going to share some of these really quite high ABV whiskies and let you see some of the things that I've got on the shelves. You've been sharing what you've got on the shelves as well. Let's start with what you're expecting me to start with. We've been talking about bourbon and the high strengths over there, and I've got a bottle of Stag, specifically a bottle of Stag Junior. And this tickles me because they go to 2 decimal points on the ABV on this one. But this is 127.9% proof, which is American proof. So if you have that, this is 63.95%. I need the light to shine on that in order to see it. Maybe you can just about see it here on this wee bronze copper label down the bottom. 63.95% ABV. This is fantastically potent, rich, dense liquid that you can sip neat. It's incredible that you can sip this neat, but you can. I think it's going to take you all night to do it because it's tiny sips that hang on the palate forever. It's ridiculously intense and flavorful. It lasts a hell of a long time, and it's wonderful stuff. I mean, I could have had this bottle for 4 years, I think. It's a gift from Gregor McQueen, Time for a Dram Gregor. He gifted me this, and it's difficult for me to get this stuff, but he was able to get some for me, and I'm grateful to have it. It's wonderful, delicious whiskey. It was that style of whiskey, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof and Jack Daniel's Single Barrel Strength, that helped me appreciate how amazing bourbon could be. It was the higher ABV bourbon that really struck a chord with me. I think you need to build up to those ABVs to be able to enjoy them and process them, to be able to sip them even at small sips. But the investment is worth every moment. The payback is tremendous. We move on a wee bit. We'll stick with World Whisky for this one as well. So what we've got here is a New Zealand whiskey, a single malt, and a tiny cute little bottle here. I don't know, what is this, 35 cl? Does it tell me how much liquid is in this? Surely. Yeah, 350 ml. This is Cardrona from New Zealand, single malt whiskey. This is the Growing Wings. This is Cask Strength. I think everything almost that comes out from Cardrona, I don't think they dilute much. It's odd, maybe the way infrastructure there set up. Whatever it may be, this is sherry and bourbon cask release. There is a batch number and things and a bottle number on this. But this is 64.9% ABV. I don't know if the camera is picking that up there. 64.9% ABV. What I will say about this Cardrona is that this is not as easy to sip neat, and this shines better with a wee splash. I think it might be to do with age, it might be to do with the style and profile of whiskey that it is, but this is gorgeous, it's delicate, it's elegant whiskey, it's delicious, good quality whiskey. but it needs just a wee bit of attenuation to bring it into being able to appreciate fully and enjoy it fully. Cardrona is also ridiculously expensive still in the UK. It's just the way it is. Inverhouse own them now. I don't know if they've got plans to change things. It's going to be interesting to see. Here we have a Scotch whisky that beats that goes higher than that again. It's been mentioned significantly tonight. There are plenty of bourbons out there that would be higher than this. I suspect if you're going to have a poll of all the highest ABV whiskies, you're going to end up with bourbon being on the top, amongst the highest ABV releases that are out there. But this is actually an Edrington release. It's a Highland Park. This has been mentioned. This is a bottle I've had on hand for many, many years. There's still a wee bit left in the bottom. It's not that great, but the ABV is typical of Highland Park releases from SNWS, 65.2% ABV. Who would have thought that I've got a stronger Scotch whisky on hand in terms of ABV than I have world whisky, and especially bourbon, right? But I can go higher still. There are Scotch whiskies out there that are higher than this. This is not the highest that I've seen. Some people have been talking about 66.6%, the Devil's Deanston and things like that. Famously, there was a 66.6% Ben Nevis and stuff. Quite a few 66.6% ABVs. But this one beats that by a smidge as well. I'm not going to be able to get the camera to focus on this, but I'll do my very, very best. This is a single cask from Glenrothes. It's been on the vPub before, one of these copper labeled ones. I'm going to try and convince the camera to convince it to focus on that. Come on. Can you see that? I might have to tell you. 66.8% ABV. And as far as I'm aware, not only the highest ABV Scotch whisky on hand, but I think it's currently the highest ABV whisky I have on hand right now. 66.8% ABV Scotch whisky. That's from a sherry cask. So we've got a couple of things going on there. It's precious wood. It's expensive. It's Edrington at a time. This is a vintage 2006. This is, I think, 2006 vintage single cask whisky. They're going to have filled this absolutely at receiver strength. This cask was never designed to be maturing any kind of 63.5. It was not intended to mature water, and that's what they've done with it. Graham Fraser's saying many bottlings from SMWS are 65% and over. Sometimes it's overwhelming, that ABV, but sometimes it doesn't need any water. It's amazing to me how it's so much to do with the whiskey, how the whiskey's made, how it's been handled, how it's matured, the cask that it's come from. All of these things have a say in the heat that we sense. That's what makes us reach for water. That's what makes us reach for something that attenuates that intense heat. But sometimes the number doesn't correlate with experience. Sometimes a 40% whiskey can be sharp and harsh, and sometimes a 60% plus whiskey can be perfectly drinkable. And I know what you're saying sounds like nonsense, but it's true. I'm going to suggest this Glenrothes is one of them. Let's see how I got on with it tonight. You're going to know this is Cask Strength whiskey. You're going to know this and know you're in high ABV. There's no question there. There is a lot of medicinal notes to this, and by medicinal I mean lozenges, cherry tunes. Why have I lost the word? Eucalyptus. There you go. Eucalyptus and menthol, that type of thing. That's the first thing right after you recognize immediately that you've got your nose in a sherry cask, because all the sherry cask elements are there as well. Cooked, boozy, stewed fruits, overripe, dried fruits, a little bit of dates and fudge, lots of spice, lots of wood spice, definitely lots of wood spices, lots of complexity, lots of detail, lots of different things for you to latch onto and end up pursuing similar flavors, lots of complexity, just really, really easy to enjoy. But you're aware that the ABV is high. So a wee sip. Cheers, everyone. Thanks for hanging out with me to this time. I'd really forgotten how good this is. There's a couple of times recently I've been sipping sherry matured whiskies, and for someone who goes on about how much he prefers bourbon matured whiskies, that is just fantastic. There's intensity and waves of heat, and yes, I have to admit to you, I can't deny that it does translate a little bit like chili heat. Certainly ABV high strength alcohol heat is here too, but there's lots of lovely spice and dark fruit and fudge, and even a kind of dark bitter chili chocolate thing. And it's just, I can still taste it. It's just here. It's hanging about. It's so concentrated. It's not got the biggest, heaviest, most luscious mouthfeel. If anything, the texture is a little bit more kind of prickly, a little more jagged, a little more kind of, but not like big spikes of youthful whiskey, but like kind of lots of little spines of prickle. Cherry tunes, again, that medicinal lozenge thing hanging around. A kind of nettle green tea leaf type note. Again, all in the finish. Just sublime stuff. So sublime that I put it to you that I think I could take a pour like this and take it to the sofa and watch a 3-hour-long movie and still have some liquid in the glass. Nosing, tasting, still tasting right now, and just not having that sense of moorishness or of going back for another drink or going back for another drink. This is not, ironically, this is the irony of ABV. This is not danger whiskey. It's the highest strength whiskey I have on hand. And I suspect I could sit the entire night with a tiny pour. The sips have to be tiny as well, but they coat even a tiny half sip is everywhere on the palate. It's so communicative. It's on your gums. It's on the roof of your mouth. It gets to the back. It's just letting you feel what it is to taste and smell and enjoy and feel. It's just what it is to be alive. It's marvelous. Sorry, it's just marvelous. Anyway, let's see what you think about that. I put a poll up at the start of tonight and I asked you, or I suggested, I tend to find I slow down when I'm sipping higher ABV whiskey. And I needed, this is fantastic to see. Thank you, fantastic. And maybe I led you, or maybe somebody would watch tonight and say I led you. But I gave 3 options: true, somewhat true, or not true. I would have to put myself somewhere in between the true and somewhat true, because there are really high strength ABV whiskies that are dangerously easy to drink. And there are low ABV whiskies that are very, very detailed and complex and contemplative that you end up spending a lot of time with. So this is kind of broad brush, but the statements back me up here. True, 50% of you agree with that statement, that you can slow down when sipping higher ABV whiskey. 40%, so that's 90 in total, say it's true or somewhat true, and 10% of you feel that for you it's not true. But that's pretty compelling, right? I'm going to end that poll now. In case it changes, I don't want it to change. What we're saying here is that somebody coming to you and saying, you're drinking 65% ABV whiskey, you must have a problem. Actually, no. If you're drinking 14% wine where you turn through a bottle, that's a wee bit more dangerous. If you're sipping 40% whiskey in a highball, and you get through 5 pours of that, you're drinking more alcohol than I am in the same amount of time sitting with this tiny little amount, because it's asking for my attention at every single step. And I can leave it sitting for 2 straight minutes and I can still taste the liquid on my palate. Lower ABV is easier to guzzle. There's a huge difference between beer and wine. Beer and wine are and fermented drinks. They're not the same as distilled drinks. Distilled drinks are very, very different things. Distilled drinks distilled for flavor rather than given a base to add flavors onto, like so many white spirits, are a step away again. I think these things demand attention, focus, contemplation, and they really do help us slow down. I don't think I drink any less than I ever have in the past today, honestly. I really think that I have to be honest with you all. However, the way I consume alcohol is very, very different. Binge drinking is gone. Getting to the weekend and, that transition from the Friday into the Saturday, that doesn't happen. I'm drinking smaller amounts and thinking about almost everything I drink. In fact, my hobby, my passion is probably less whiskey and more my relationship with whiskey. It's fantastic. Jimmy Legacy, and I've actually explained that exact high ABV reasoning to public health officials here in Canada. After a while, they seem to understand, and they want to increase taxes according to ABV. They wanted to increase taxes according to ABV. It's just madness. It's when we try to work with ignorance, it doesn't work. Grab my SNWS Highland Park, says James, 11-year-old first fill ex-bourbon from the shelf to pour, 64.8% ABV, just 0.4 of an ABV under my Highland Park. There's a lot of that stuff out there, James. Danny is saying, does that mean the 10% are alkies? Asking for a friend. No, because I know that there are some people that just don't feel that way, or it doesn't. Alcohol and alcohol consumption is one size does not fit all. It's different for everyone. I think we all need to be a wee bit mindful. Awareness is the first step. But it's how people interpret the question and the way I've worded it, the clumsy way I've worded it as well. John Ginger Genius is saying, I put true, but after tonight, I have to change my mind. So he's been drinking the higher ABV stuff, maybe a bit too quickly tonight, John. Jimmy Legacy, and I said no to the question because I drink everything painfully slowly, no matter the ABV. So a perfect example of somebody that would put not true. But that's very personal to you. And I've witnessed how you can dwell over a 40% whiskey, every bit the same as over a 60% whiskey, Jimmy. It's spot on. Dan is saying the vPubs is the closest thing to binge drinking I get, and Thursdays are generally a little bit more than the GP would advise. We all need to be mindful. Our GPs are probably going to be a wee bit more strict than the average bear, right? But fantastic. Listen, we've talked a lot about ABV. I hope I've covered all of the salient points. I hope I've managed to bring something that's reasonably interesting. It was interesting to me. Talking about interesting, hang around for the quiz at the end. See how you get on. I think there's a good chance that lots of you are going to enjoy celebrating a 10 out of 10 tonight before you slip off to bed. But we're far too late. It's 2 hours 27 in. So we'll clip through the quiz quite quickly tonight. I hope that you've... Oh, wow. Present? Have we lost connection to Google Slides all of a sudden? What's happening here? Let's just moved into a different place. That's not very good when they do that, is it? I hope that you enjoy the quiz at the end. It's always a bit of good fun. I'm always wondering about, people following the crowd and leaning on each other. I think that that's a very good thing. I think the quiz at the end is less to do with testing people's knowledge and more about encouraging people's knowledge, right? If we talk about tonight that ignorance, like Jimmy Legg is talking about the legislation in Canada and things like that, if we talk about those concepts and talk about bringing somebody into your whiskey collection and them seeing all the whiskey on your shelf or your cabinet or wherever you keep it, whiskey room you might have, and they immediately look at you and judge you and say you've got a problem. And then you spend 5 minutes explaining to them, if you had a problem, you wouldn't be able to accumulate this collection. It's a different thing, and it needs a different mindset. Anyway, always optional. The quiz at the end, always multiple choice, always just playing against yourself. If you want to lean on the quiz, on the crowd for your quiz answers, you're very welcome to do that. Graham Fraser is saying, interested to know how long barflies take to finish any dram. Whiskey with Molly saying, I've matchsticks keeping my eyes open. Luckily, I'm working from home tomorrow. Bring on the quiz. You're always here. Even when you're knackered, Ben, you're here. Overland Drams, Chuck is in as well. Good point, Aquaviti, Chuck. It's wonderful to have you. Dan is saying it was a great vPub tonight. Really enjoyed it a lot. Thank you, Dan. It's really nice to hear. Ian Bruce is saying, I do have found myself enjoying a whiskey or two more, sitting, analysing instead of knocking it back a ton in a night. Ian, that's exactly what we need to hear and what we need to say, the information that we need to spread, let people understand. Everyone, good luck. There's going to be 10 out of 10s to celebrate tonight. I'm confident. Rick Johnson is celebrating. He's saying undefeated. There's confidence in there. Question 1. Which of these distilleries is owned by Inverhouse? Which of these distilleries is owned by Inverhouse? A. Balmenic in Speyside, B. Cardrona in New Zealand, or C. Speyside in Speyside? Speyside Distillery, which is, of course, is located in Speyside. Which of those distilleries is owned by Inverhouse? I might have helped you tonight. Trevor Hedge is a barfly. Trevor, have I welcomed you before? It's nice to have you in tonight. My pal Daniel is here. Daniel Key, good to see you, buddy. Daisy is here. Wonderful to have you in, Daisy. Fantastic to see you. I've confirmed I'm going to Limburg, so hopefully, Daisy, you're going to Limburg again this year. We'll be able to hook up again. That would be amazing. Dave the Brave is saying A and B. Jimmy Jazz is saying A. Cal Taylor is saying A. Michael, C 2019. Always a mouthful of a handle. I'll just call you Michael from here on in, Michael. You're suggesting that it's B, and Lassie is here too saying B. MG Rodden is saying A and B. Vasil Glagola is saying A. Good to see you, Vasil. John Ginger Jr. said A. All over the place, but generally strong. Jimmy Legg is saying ABBA, A and B. And you're all absolutely spot on. Oh, yes, says Daisy. Limburg is a go. Fantastic, Daisy. Always look forward to seeing your smiling face and seeing you hanging out with us over there. It's a wonderful wee weekend. Balmenic and Cardrona is absolutely spot on. A wee banana skin in there. Sometimes I give you a freebie to begin with, and all of them are viable answers. Tonight there was a banana skin. You had to watch out for one that wasn't. Question 2. Which two of these distilleries features a non-functioning ventilator? That's the Pagoda roof, the Doig ventilator, if you want, Charles Cree Doig's invention to help that for the drying of barley in the kilns. Which of these distilleries features a non-functioning one of those that's never helped to dry barley? A. Lochranza, B. Glengoyne, or C. Arnaho? It's kind of become the thing. If you see the malt whiskey trail and things, the icon that they use is as that pagoda, that Doig's ventilator shape. It's come to stand for distillery, Scotch malt distillery. I'm asking tonight, which of these distilleries features a non-functioning ventilator that's never helped to dry barley? Following the early crowd, admits Justin Wan. That's okay, buddy. That's what we're here to do, to share the burden. Graham Fraser, who a lot of people follow, is suggesting that it's A and C. Hellswood is also saying A and C. And Jimmy is saying it's which two is the question. Oh, the confidence of Jimmy as well. Let's have a wee sip on this Glenrothes. Peter Frank is agreeing. 2 answers needed. Absolutely spot on. All of these 3 distilleries, all 3 of them have non-functioning pagoda ventilator roofs. However, one of them was once used to dry barley, and that was Glengoyne. long time ago. The answers I was looking for was all of the Doig's ventilator roofs on these distilleries are imitation style. They're just there for decoration because it is, after all, a distillery. Lochranza and Ardnahoe, ANC, as so many of you spotted. Question 3, which of these is the oldest Brown-Forman Scotch malt distillery? Which of these is the oldest from Brown-Forman? A, Benriach in Speyside, B, Glendronach in the Eastern Highlands, or C, Glenglassaugh in the Eastern Highlands? We're looking for the oldest of those three. You can grab your malt whisky yearbook and you can flick through and look at the founding year if you want, but the point of this is to build knowledge, and instinct should tell you the truth here, and your instinct should betray the answer. Joe Smith is in. So good to have you, Joe. Nice to see you. Mel on a 2 out of 2. Mel, I hope I've welcomed you before. If not, I'm welcoming you tonight. And Big Ed is in. Good to see you. Bob Wenting. George McLeod. Fantastic, George. Lachlan McKenzie is here. Where's Roy? Roy Overmere in Norway. Fantastic. Roddy Graham is in, playing along for the quiz at the end. Great to have you in, Roddy. Keep me right, won't you? Lassie Otsman is suggesting this is B. Roddy is saying B, and Angus Craig is saying B as well. I have to say the majority of you, with very few. 1826 is a long time ago, says Jimmy. B. I wonder if he knows that from memory. Benriach, 1897, I think. Glenglassaugh, 1875. Glendronach, 1826. Jimmy Legg is spot on. The answer I was looking for is B. All of you are doing very well. 3 out of 3 so far for most of you. Which of these distilleries has an in-house malt floor and also released a recent release? My goodness, I should have read that again. To highlight and celebrate that in-house malting. Am I talking about A, Bamor on Islay, C, Benriach in Speyside, or C, Benromach in Speyside? Which of the B distilleries has not only their in-house floor maltings, but they actually release a specific expression that's fully distilled from barley that's been in-house floor malted, and just to celebrate the fact that they do that. Alliteration is not your friend, Aquavite. Sometimes I like alliteration, but when it's not on purpose, it can catch me out, as you've just spotted, Jimmy. Spot on. Oh, it's so good. It's such a tasty wee whiskey. 66.8% as well. I do find that if you abuse higher strength whiskies, not only do you find yourself suffering a wee bit, but they tend to give me a wee bit of a headache, which causes me to make sure I've got a good big glass of water on hand, make sure I'm hydrating myself, but also be very mindful and slow down a wee bit, especially when the next day is a work day, like tomorrow being a Friday. All right, I think most of you have locked this in. Most of you are going for B for Benriach. Absolutely. Bamor has their in-house floor maltings, but they don't do anything specifically through the releases to celebrate that. It's just a story. I do believe it does affect their spirit, their distillate, but it's not anything we can taste in the bottle. So abused is the whiskey that comes out as official releases. Benromach don't have in-house floor maltings. Benriach does, and they do. So the answer was once more B. Question 5. Here we have a Delphi Distillery's Dancy Man. This is the Dancy Man. I'm going to ask you, who is the Dancy Man? Is the Dancy Man A, William Gladstone, B, David Lloyd George, or C, the famous restless Peter Mackey? Did I say I was a bit late and I missed Q1? I could probably remind you what Q1 was. It was a 2 out of 3 answer, Roddy. Which of these distilleries is owned by Inverhouse? And the options I gave was Balmenic, Cardrona, and Speyside, I think. I can't remember which the other one was. So you had a 66% chance of getting that one right, buddy. Have we had this question before, Trevor Hedge? Yes, you very much have. Well, let's see. you've either had this question exactly as it is or a slight variation of this before. Absolutely, but I felt it was good to pull it out tonight um, because of the topics that we're discussing. Don't think that that is a way for me to help you in any way. It's actually going to make it worse for you. So are we looking at William Gladstone? Are we looking at David Lloyd George? Are we looking at Restless Peter Mackie? We are, as you've nailed it indeed, Petehead is confirming that it was Speyside indeed. We can confirm that this wee dancey man is in fact Sir William Gladstone, who was responsible for seeing through the legislation that meant that duty, that taxes weren't paid on whiskey until it was ready to be sold. So there was no penalties for losses and all of that stuff. Whiskey could be kept in bond and it could be paid. Taxes could only be paid on the amount of liquid that was left. Not only did that encourage a lot of different dynamics in whiskey, quality controls added and things like that, but it forever changed the way that whiskey could be handled and produced. So there we go. William Gladstone is that wee dancey man. Question 6. Ardnamurchan recently released its Madeira Cask Release Batch 2. When did it release its Batch 1? So we've just had the Madeira Cask Release Batch 2. A lot of chatter about this whiskey right now. I did feature it last week on the vPub. But I want everyone to think back. When did Batch 1 come out? Was it A, 2021, B, 2022, or C, 2023? Look at you all celebrating your 5 out of 5s. I don't even need to shout you all out because there's absolutely everyone. Remember, this is the easy half. Things are going to get a bit tricky from here on in. Jimmy Legacy and Dramface. Yes. There was an Ardnamurchan Madeira Cask review went out on Dramface this week, which is what has prompted this. Rob Graham is calling this an asshat. Why? Because our perception of time is so rubbish. It's really, really difficult to remember. Listen, we're all enjoying our 5 out of 5 so far, Roddy. It's going to get harder from 6 through 10. And this is just the start of it. Okay, Whiskey with Molly saying B. Lachlan McKenzie saying B. Rick Johnson saying B. Gonna go with C, says Justin Wan. The Bottle by the Waterfall, Jerry Miller, thanks to Peter Lee. Oh, they're helping each other out. I can tell you that the labelling on the bottle of Ardnamurchan was AD10 or AD/10:22. That tells you that the year was 2022. That's amazing, isn't it, that it was 2022? So the winter from 2022 into 2023 is when we enjoyed that Madeira. The 10 is obviously for October of that year, so it was late in the year release. Or it could be the 10th release of 2022. I'm starting to doubt myself now. I think it might have been the 10th release. So there we go. It was a long time ago, 2.5 years. Question 7. Which of these age statements is yet to feature on a Springbank Local Barley release? I'm going to give you 3 age statements, and I need you to find the one that has not yet featured on a Springbank Local Barley over the years. A, 12 years old. B, 16 years old. C, 23 years old. Lots of you. Celebrating 6 out of 6. Kyle Taylor, Hellswood, George McLeod, Ben Whiskey with Molly. Rick Johnson, The One Glass Man, Big Ed, Graham Young, Lachlan McKenzie, Scott Allen, Ginger Genius, Daisy Vleeland, Dave the Brave, Danny Edmonton, Where's Roy? Almost everyone, it feels like. Jerry Miller, Bob Wenting, Daniel Key, Vasil Glagola, all celebrating your 6 out of 6s. There's going to be 10 out of 10s tonight. I just feel it. Whiskey Mac 36 looks like a new name. Good to have you in, Whiskey Mac. Roddy is going for A on this one. Big Ed is going for A. Petehead Frank is suggesting C. Joe Smith is also saying C. Michael is saying C. Ben Whiskey with Molly is going for A, and Hellswood is also going for A, and Bob is gambling on an A while Petehead switches to an A. I can tell you that, believe it or not, there are 23-year-old releases of Springbank local barley out there. There is a 16-year-old release, I think, in 2016. Maybe that's gone from memory. I could be wrong there. But there is yet to be a 12-year-old Springbank local barley release. One Glassman is saying, I would think C, but I'll say A. You just sneaked in there at the end. Well done. Justin is saying, will there ever be a double banana skin question? Well, we can work on it, Justin. Do we really want to make it even more warped and tricky? I already take enough heat as it is. Question 8. Good luck, everyone. Going into the really tough ones to finish. Which new distillery, yet to release its own whiskey, features heritage barley, extra long fermentations, and a specialist farmhouse yeast, which it will start to sell as Dalclaggy from 2028. That's the plan, estimated 2028. So we're looking for a new distillery, extra long fermentations, heritage barley, its own in-house yeast, but the brand will be Dalclaggy. What's the name of the distillery? A, Orkney, B, North Point, C, Port of Leith. All three of these distilleries are in operation. None of them have released their own whiskey as of yet. But when they do, it'll be called Dalclaggy, and it'll be made from heritage barley varieties. It'll have its own in-house yeast used for fermentation for an extra long fermentation time. Jimmy Legg is saying 8,500 quid for 23-year-old local barley. Yeah, it's for gods, Jimmy. It's not for us. Tricky questions to finish on. Roddy, you might remember the last whiskey that I finished on is actually a whiskey that you put in my hands. Yeah, I bought it from a good spirits company a long time ago. It's the highest ABV one that I have on hand, and it's the one I finished with tonight. This is the Glenrothes single cask. Do you remember it? The one that you shared at the tasting was a previous release. I think it was 66.2 or something. And I loved it so much. It was sold out, but another one came in. Good Spirits Company. Probably gone back to, what, 2018? Something like that. Now that it's open, it's fantastic. Going with the crowd, lots and lots of people suggesting B on this one. There's been a lot of B answers tonight. Don't think for a second that I put any thought into that or patterns or anything. But I have to say you're absolutely spot on, Justin. When I say North Point, this district in Hong Kong where I used to live. Wow. Rod Grace activated the copper labels. That's right. You remember it. North Point is the answer. Rod, you might remember Greg Benson. Greg's up there distilling at North Point, and he's making our future Dalclaggy right now. Question 9. How many Scottish whisky distilleries begin with Strath? How many Straths do we have? Do we have A, fewer than the Ards, B, the same as the Ards, or C, more than the Ards? By the Ards, I'm talking about Ardbeg, Ardross, Ardnamurchan, Ardnahole, all the Ards. I'm not going to list all of them off to you. How many Scottish distilleries begin with Strath? This should have an asshat next to it because, of course, you need to know the answer to two things in order to answer this. So it's tricky, but this is the penultimate question. How many Strath whisky distilleries do we have in Scotland? Do we have fewer than the Ards, the same as the Ards, or more than the Ards? Jimmy Legg is saying 5 Ards, 3 Strath. Oh, wow. Very confident, Jimmy. But now he's clarifying. He's saying malt distilleries. He's now in a panic. No, I don't specify malt distilleries. I've actually just said how many Scottish whisky distilleries. So maybe it should be an asshat and a banana skin, Jimmy. A, going with the flow, says Lachlan. Don't worry, Lachlan. You're absolutely right. We have Strathmill, we have Strathyla, we have Strathern, and we have Strathclyde in Glasgow. But we have 5 Ards. We have Ardmore, Ardmurchan, Ardnahoe, Ardross, Ardbeg. I think that's me hit 5 already. So the answer was A, fewer than the Ards. Well done, everyone. A hell of a lot of you are going to be carrying 9 out of 9s before we run into the last question of the night. We can finish up our Thursday night. Whiskey with Molly, Kyle Taylor, Hell's Wood, Ginger Genius. Michael's just slipped up. Mel slipped up on a couple as well. A few of you slipped up on some. Still great scores coming in. Bob on a 9, along with Rick, George, Lackland, Scott Allen. Good to see you, Scott. Jimmy Legg, George McLeod. So good to see you in as well. Daisy, Jerry Miller. Where's Roy? Angus Craig is suggesting a bananas hat. Big Ed. Graham Young, so many of you on 9. There's going to be loads and loads and loads of you on 10 out of 10 tonight, so let's have it. Roddy Graham's got a 9 out of 9 as well. The ass hat at the end, okay. By the end of the year, how many distilleries will feature operational worm tub condensers? There's a worm tub list. Worm tub condensing from the distillate. By the end of this year, how many Scotch malt distilleries will feature worm tub condensers? And I've got that in the answer. About the same number of Scotch malt distilleries as A, built since 2000, according to the Malt Whisky Yearbook. About the same number of Scotch malt distilleries, B, owned by Dewars, Inverhouse and Chivas Brothers combined. Or C, about the same number of Scotch malt distilleries located on an island, including the island of Islay. So we're looking for the number of worm tub distilleries by the end of this year. Does that equate to the same number as new distilleries built since the year 2000? Does it equate to the same number of distilleries owned by Dewars, Inverhouse and Chivas Brothers, Pernod Ricard, otherwise known as? Or does it equate to the same as the number of distilleries that are located on an island, including the island of Islay? This is big guess time. Jimmy Legg is saying, what do we think it is now? 17. Daniel Key is saying, well then, I'll take my 9 out of 10. You've got to give it a guess. You've got to give it a guess. You've got to give it a guess. Is it going to be one of those nights that everyone celebrates a 10 out of 10? Or is it going to be one of those nights that the rug is swept out from under your feet right at the last gasp? That's what the ass hat is all about. So you need knowledge, you need luck, good fortune, you need teamwork, and you need knowledgeable pals. You need sometimes to lean on the lounge, the community, right? But more than anything, sometimes you just need luck. What kind of madman do you have to be to think of this question? Oh, Jimmy, I thought you knew me. Okay, I can tell you, if it helps you in any way whatsoever, I can tell you that the number of distilleries built since 2000, according to the Malt Whisky Yearbook, number's 49. The number of distilleries owned by Dewars, Inverhouse and Chivas Brothers. So Dewars 5, Inverhouse 5, Chivas Brothers 12, that's 22. Located on an island, including Islay, numbers today 25 distilleries. I can tell you that by the end of 2025, including new distilleries such as Cabrach, Kythe, adding to the already legacy distilleries using worm tub distillation, will be 22 worm tub distilleries. 22. If you answered B, you've managed to get through the ass. I can see so many of you have. Sharmila Suze is at around 20. He's going for B. What fantastic work. Good deduction. Hellswood, 10 out of 10. Whiskey with Molly saying, oh, it's B. Saying yes. Dave the Brave, 10 out of 10. 8 out of 10 for Joe Smith. 9 out of 10 for Jimmy Jazz. Elsewhere is saying your beauty. Look at the 10s. My goodness, what a jump that was. The chat is just filling up with people celebrating the 10 out of 10s. Your beauty, says Helen. Jerry Miller on a 10. Daniel Key on a 10. Rick Johnson on a 10. Well done, Daniel. You thought you were just going to take a 9 as well. Cal Taylor celebrating a 9. Fantastic, along with Big Ed as well. Graham Fraser and Ben Whiskey with Molly both celebrating 10 out of 10s. Rod Graham just missing out. What did you go with at the end? Did you slip up at the end, Roddy? Justin Wan is saying Aquaviti, the ass hats are getting harder when the numbers are so close these days. Well, one of them was 49. Literally, the answer was half as much. So that reduces it to maybe, for a kind of educated guess, 50-50 scenario. Lachlan McKenzie is saying 10 out of 10, which is so much leaning. That's okay. Don't worry about it, Lachlan. It's good for you to be leaning on such good company. Scott Allen is saying, oh, well, for a 9 out of 10, what a score, Scott. Well done. Bob, the same on 9 out of 10. One glass man. Jerry Miller celebrating a 10 out of 10. Sharmila Souza has said 10 out of 10. Daisy, congrats to all the 10 out of 10 she's saying. Right, I'm off to bed, says Ben. Great vPub. Knackered. See some of you in Leith. Can't wait for it. I'm really looking forward to it. I'll see you there. Roddy Graham is saying, I'm coming round to confiscate that Glen Rothis. I'll bring it to you next time, buddy, so you can have a wee toot on it. You'll love it. Aye, the ass hat got me, says Roddy. Right at the end, Justin is saying, going to have to catch the first part of the session on replay because the Dutch contingent here has distracted me with the football talk again. Fantastic. Listen, 10 Aquaviti memberships being gifted from Jimmy Legg. You generous soul, Jimmy. Thank you so much. Giving 10 folks some Barfly memberships. It's wonderful to have your support, buddy. Bob Wenting buying me a dram at the death as well, saying, thanks, really enjoyed the evening, Bob. It's nice to have had you here. The fact that you can enjoy it is a big, big bonus indeed. Hellswood is saying fab vPub this evening. We'll be late to the lock-in as well as we're filling our faces at Kwangtung. Save us a seat, Aquaviti. You're absolutely safe. Your bar stool will be there, ready and waiting for you. And hopefully there'll be a wee dram in front of you as well. Rick Johnson's bought me a dram as well to say, look forward to sharing a dram with you next week, Roy. Rick, I'm looking forward to seeing you again, my friend. Make sure your phone is kept close by and in a safe place this time, buddy, right? You don't want to repeat a lost phone like last time. Pierre is saying, and with that 10 out of 10 celebration, I'm calling it a day and smiling as I hit the sack. Thanks for organising another fun vPub Aquaviti, and to all of you, see you next time in Slancheva. Michael is saying Aquaviti, thank you very much. I think TYVM is thank you very much for another great evening. Learned a lot to better understand the ABV possibilities. Michael, that means so much. Thank you. Lachlan is saying thanks, Roy, and thanks for the help, folks, and have a good evening. Danny Heberton buys me a dram as well to say that's 2 10 out of 10s in a row. Time to get Mr. Ass Hat back. I think, is the quiz getting too easy? Do we need to reach out to Menno to write things again to make it much more challenging again? We'll need to have a wee word with our pal in Belgium, Lord Asshat himself. Listen, in the meantime, I'm looking forward to hanging out with you all on hopefully Sunday night, the lock-in, talk about the Daft Mill release, talk about the tasting in Leith, of course. I'm going to be prioritising patrons for that as well. Of course I am, like I always do. Really looking forward to the Leith weekend. It should be fabulous. Next week, joined by Phil and Simon Thompson as they try and help me answer some of the questions I've got about why would anybody be looking to invest and build and buy or potentially look at investment in a new distillery in 2025, given the really, really quite acute change we've seen in the market over the last 18 to 30 months. They'll be here, but they don't need to stay on topic. If you want to ask them about other things, it's Phil and Simon. They're very candid, they're very open. They'd be happy to take your questions on anything else as well. Be nice to have some guests back behind the bar at the vPub, don't you think? I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to finishing off this wee delicious Glenrothes as well. Thanks very much for joining me for another Thursday night. I'll raise it. Wish you all the very best. Remind you that you're very dearly loved, and I look forward to hanging out with you next Thursday night. Until then, Slancheva Barflies. Cheers. Mm-hmm.